Zoom. We're going to share the screen now and get to work. Get to learn. Oops, go back to the beginning here. All the way back to the beginning. Okay. So, welcome. This is our fourth shiur. We had an introduction and then 3 shiurim so far. So today we are doing Siman Peiches, which has 2 sifim in it. And thematically, as we'll soon see, Siman Peiches has 4 sifim. And the last sif is related thematically to the idea of separation of kelim. So we'll put that in this shiur also. And then shiur number 5 will be on the rest of Siman Peiches, which is Sif Aleph, Beis, and Gimel, which is about the waiting period between Bosor and Chalav. Next week is Lag Ba'omer, will be no shiur, and so we'll be one ahead unless there is a possibility I won't be able to make it the week after that, but we'll let you know in advance. Right now we're scheduled in 2 weeks from now for week number 5. I did want to mention very important that it's you should be doing chazara and constant chazara, and after altogether 16 shiurim. That means after today we are 20% finished. Yeah, we're 25% finished. 4 out of 16 shiurim. So it's a chela choshuv of the material. So from what we're learning, and so very, very important to do chazara, so you don't have to learn it like it's new, and the less time transpires between the time you learned it the first time and the time you do the chazara, and to constantly do chazara. If you don't remember it, chazar it over. Okay, this was the outline that I gave before in terms of general Peizayin was the general klalim, what's Bosor, what's Chalav, what's Bishul, Leisavashal, Gdi, Bachalev, all those 3 things, the general principles. And then we have from Peiches to Tzadik Beis different sorts of mixtures of food, and then from there to the end, more or less the inyan of Kelim, with some exceptions over there. Tzadik Zayin is not to make milchika bread. We're going to be speaking about knives a bit today, but we'll have Siman Tzadik Vav, very important Siman, about Dover Charif, sharp things like onions. And we'll be mentioning some things from there today. But today, as I said, we'll be doing Peiches and part of Peites. These are just words that I put together to help remember a 1-word summary for each Siman. So Bosor, Chalav, and Bishul with the keywords in Siman Peizayin. Siman Peiches is Shleilalas Bosor al Shulchan Sheichan Alav Gevina. So it's a Shulchan, not eating on the same table. And then Shleilach al Gevina Achere Bosor is speaking about the time period, which is Siman Peites. So it's just another way of looking at the breakup of the simonim. So Siman Peiches, not to eat at the same table, milk and meat. So first we're going to have with one person, not bringing in another person. And one person is not even allowed to have milk and meat on the same table. And then Sif Beis is going to be speaking about more than one person at the same table. And then Peites is about the waiting period. So that's Sif Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. Aleph is first Bosor, then Chalav. Beis is first Chalav, then Bosor, and Gimel is a Tavshil Shel Bosor, Tavshil Shel Chalav. And then we have Sif Dalud is Hafrada, also separation between different types of kelim, and especially knives. So that's what we're putting together this last din, since it has to do with separation based on place. If you remember, Eilim Shana Nefesh, so Eilim is the time period, so that's going to be next shiur. But different locations and what sort of things you have to be careful about is going to be today's shiur. Okay, so here's another way of looking at the overview. So we have Chila Shulchan Echad, eating on one table, which is Peiches. Hafrada ben Kli Bosor Kli Chalav, separating not only the location where you're eating, but the kelim that you're using. And then the Haptanas Man ben Bosor L'Chalav. So Siman Peiches is about eating on one table. Peites, that's if Dalit is talking about separating the kelim you're using. The key issue here, talk about using a knife. Can you use a knife for cutting a milchik knife, a fleishik knife? Can you use it to cut something parv? What happens if you cut the challah with a fleshik and knife, what happens to the rest of the challah? So we'll be speaking about the end of today's shiur. And then the first three sifim, some peites is the waiting period between milk and meat. And we have, again, two sifim and sim peches, about one person, meaning even one person, what are the dinim? And then you have two people eating at the same table, what are the dinim? And then among the kelim, we have knives. Sakinim have special status in halacha, as we will in Mirza Hashem be discussing. And you have other kelim, what's with tablecloths and plates and things like this. Okay, so let's jump in. And this is actually a Mishnah. Right at the beginning, Parakol Bosor, Daf Kuf Gimel, Sechta Chuln. First Mishnah, second Mishnah. I feel of Bsar Chayav, that even meat from a chaya, like a deer, and an eif, meaning even milk and meat, which is only the rabbanon, also lahalis al shulchan sheichal lav gevina. You're not allowed to put on the table that you're eating cheese on it. Shalei yovei lachlam yachad, that you shouldn't come to eat them together. And this the Ran says that since both of them are heter, lebedili inish minei, the same svara we use many of the chumras lagaba chametz on Pesach, since the whole year you're eating chametz, so therefore we're worried about the same thing also. So therefore, if you're eating milchiks, even if you're by yourself, you shouldn't have fleshiks on the table, because you might forget. But if it's not a table you're eating from, it's just a countertop, for example, and you're just preparing the food, so then you're allowed to put one beside the other. And that's the Mishnah in Chuln. It says that you're allowed to do that. The minhag today is not to do like that. There's a Yad Avram, if I'm not mistaken, that speaks different reasons why, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But as far as the chashash, that we're concerned that a person might end up eating them together, we don't have to worry about that on the countertop, because people are not eating from the pots on the countertop or from the food on the countertop. That's just prepared to be served on the shulchan sha'echlon olav. So that's different here, since you're in the process of eating. So therefore, we're concerned you might come to eat together. So this is actually, a shaila you have in the Gemara, right? And the Gemara over there is a Teisvis. And Taz points out that it's b'sar chayav eif is b'chal midrabanan. Even if it would be b'sar behema, and it would be regular meat, the chances, if you're going to eat the two of them together, it's if it's cool enough to eat, usually it's not going to be yatzalet this way. What are the chances that you're going to come to Bosor b'chalav de'raisa? It's only the worst case scenario, eating at the table. Normally, you would only come to nisa derabban, and even more so when it's b'sar chayav eif. So we're worried you might come to eat together. So that's a gezeda. And if you did eat it together, it would also be derabban. So what are we worried about? L'chura, it's a gezeda l'gezeda. So the Taz says, "Afshagam yachli yachli yibzes minateda, kenz derech bishul, yeah, kan chazal roll and nachan ligzer gezeda l'gezeda." Then this is the Teisvis point to ask the question. We have a klal, ein ligzer gezeda l'gezeda, but with many cases we do see that the ligzer gezeda l'gezeda. The Pri Megadim discusses shitas Rashi, with shitas Teisvis. How do we learn this? You can look in Encyclopedia Talmud, engaged in gezeda l'gezeda. Whole arichas about this Indians. One of the explanations is that you have something which is very, very rogil. Rashi said chad gezedahu. Once they made, and you have this in many places in the Gemara where they ask the question, engaged in gezeda and it says kol chad gezedahu. When they made the first gezeda, so they will gazer all the things together with it. Others say that even if they weren't gazer, everything together. But nevertheless, since it's something which is so rogil and the people are accustomed to eating like this, so therefore it's not really a gzeira l'gzeira. In any case, we see many places Bosor Cholav, and here's one of them that clearly we are gazer, even though it looks like it's a gzeira l'gzeira. So here you have a table, person's eating at the table. So to put the two different minim, Bosor and Cholav, on the table, even though you're only eating one of them, nevertheless, it's prohibited, it shouldn't be on the table. Now, as far as putting on the table b'chal, do you have to have a fleishaka table and a milchaka table, or a fleishaka matzad the table? Is this table now treif? They put now the food directly on the table. Here's a bottle of milk on the table, a container of milk, and here's a plate of chicken on the table. So what happens now? Is this table now treif? So as we'll see later on, that those that say that if it's in kalim, we don't really have to worry. But what exactly are you worried about? If you put the chicken itself or a piece of cheese not on a plate, straight on the table, okay, then we're worried about leftovers. We'll see later on about having different tablecloths that we're worried about remnants of the food on the table. Beis Yosef quotes the Tshuvas HaMiyuchasis, the Ramban. Those say this from the Rashba, really, that you just look at your tablecloth. You see this tip of Bosor, it gets dirty, the tablecloth. You have to clean the table, you have to clean the tablecloth. So there's food, lemaisa, that comes on it. And also, who says that just because it's in kalim, everything stays inside the kalim, that things spill outside the kalim. Nevertheless, al pi din, if not for this gezerah, you wouldn't really need a separate tablecloth on it. As I mentioned, the minig is that even the case that is mutar al pi shulchan aruch, a shulchan shesudar alav tafshil, we'll put a picture of it over here. So here, makom sheragim laneach tafshil. So here's a serving counter. So it's a dvar mishnah, and it's passing like that a shulchan aruch. There's no problem putting the milk and meat over there on that counter. The problem is putting on the table because you're eating from it. But what about what happened the whole idea? You need a fleishka counter, you need a milchaka counter. Where does it come from? So I mentioned the Achreinim speak about it. What is the chashash? So the simplest explanation is Yisrael Kadeshim Haim. We do things even when we're not required to do them, and especially Bosor B'cholov, we see with all of our different harchakis. Nevertheless, people get mixed up. We see people get mixed up from time to time. It happens. So something like this, especially you're going to have hot food, you might have a hot pot over there. So therefore, we are machmer. The din of shtei kedeiros, which I mentioned in a previous shiur, it's going to come up very prominently in later shiurim. But even if you would have a hot pot of Bosor that touched a hot pot of cholav, nevertheless, if both of them are dry at the point of contact, even if they're both hot, the din is that at least b'diavad, certainly b'diavad, it's okay. So what would be the problem of putting both milk and meat on that counter? Shulchan Aruch says, okay, why don't we do it? So aside from being just extra careful, there is a chashash that, let's say, as we mentioned before from the Beis Yosef's quote, that and we'll see later on too, that you have little pieces of food on there. So what happens if you have a hot pot of chicken, especially marble counters like this? People don't always use pot holders. They put it straight on the counter. So if you have some leftover, let's say the container of milk was on the counter and there's a little milk leaking from the bottom, and then you take a hot klirishon of Bosor and you put it straight onto the countertop, so then you have a problem. Even if it wasn't a klirishon, it depends on how hot it is. It could be irui, and so on. So therefore, certainly the minig is to be machmer in such a case, even though the Shulchan Aruch says that it's okay. And so this, that the two foods have to be far from each other, that is something that many of the poskim mentioned. You have a teisvis towards the beginning of Naveda Zar in Chum that speaks to, we have to worry when stirring a pot, you have to worry that some of it is going to spill into the other one, but certainly lechatchila you keep them at enough of a distance that they should not have any contact. Okay, as we mentioned, Minig Yisrael Kadeshim, that even on the countertop, here he says over here, lahafri, to make a separation between them, but even further to designate countertops. That's today the minig, to make the fleishaka table, and the milchaka table, and a fleishaka countertop, and a milchaka countertop. This is the proper way to do it. So now we have over here a table, and the shach goes into whole arichas about different cases about shari surim. If you're worried having two different types of food at the same table, namely milk and meat, because you might come to eat from the other one, So you're allowed to put nevela on the table. If you're sitting in the park, you're making a barbecue, and somebody, or you're in the workplace, and people are eating lunch on the table, and some of them are eating non-kosher. So you're allowed to eat at the same table. Why shouldn't the same thing apply? So the Shach says some cases it taka does apply, in some cases it doesn't apply. What are we looking for? So one thing that we're looking at is how rogil is it for people to eat these things. So when we say lebedila inshemine, you mentioned before from the Ran and from other Rishonim, that people constantly eat Bosor and they eat chalav. So the rogil thing, and so to chametz b'Pesach is something that people are rogil to eat. Nevela, people are not the rogil to eat. People don't eat chazer. People eat kosher, don't eat chazer. People don't eat kosher, eat chazer. But people don't eat chazer, they eat nevela. But we don't eat nevela. So if there's not kosher meat at the table, you don't have to worry that it's on the same table. Now, whether the table is tareif or not, that's another story. As we mentioned, that according to the Shulchan Aruch, there's not really a problem in that. You can bavar, and certainly with a tablecloth or something of the sort, to make sure that you don't run to a problem with the table. But are you worried to eat at the same table? So the Shach says that if it's something, Bosor b'chalav, so that's something you have to be careful. Okay, dvarim mitorim rogel ochlam. So that's why we have the gezerah in this case. Okay, but if it's nevela, there's no problem. People are not, you're not worried the person's going to come to eat nevela. Notice the dark shalosh klippos tmeyas color on that chicken over there. So since badili inishmine, that people keep away from it anyway, we're not worried having it on the same table. Obviously, it shouldn't be so close that it's going to bump into it or spill or something like that. But do we have to worry that you're going to come to eat from it? That we're not worried. Next case, he discusses chametz of Pesach. So we see, he brings down that that's the problem. So the Shach says, is this a contradiction to my clause? He says, no. First of all, it's also b'mashahu. So here, if it's Pesach, the guy has his matzahs over here, and there's somebody else is eating bread over there. The person goes in cholam to work, and he's eating his Pesach dikam cholim, and then somebody else is eating bread at the table. So then it's not just a question something might mix in. And chametz of Pesach is a mashahu. To one little crumb shouldn't come in. It's very difficult to avoid. So therefore, that's one reason for the chumrah that chametz of Pesach is also. And the other thing is, like we said, ragil and kol hashana lachle. Really, there's three reasons. Since you eat chametz the whole year, so therefore it's also aser. And there's a third reason as well, which ends up being negay later on, al lechem yichya adam, that lechem is a food which is considered to be always on the table. A meal is called lechem. We just had it in Rashi, chitas. And that was the normal way people ate. The normal food to eat is lechem. Okay, you need a little something to get the bread down. But basically, suda is bread. So something which is rogel on the table, so people eat it all the time. So aside from chametz in general, but especially if it's bread, then you have an extra reason to aser it. And that ends up being another nafkamina. What about lechem iser? Let's say it's non-kosher bread. So that's also a problem. Even though nevela, if it's not kosher, we're not worried about, but bread that's not kosher is different. Lechem yichya adam, like we just said. That since everybody eats bread, so then it's also a problem. The emphasis.
Why is that different than the nevela? If the nevela looks just like the kosher, and the bosor lechem is seen, at least in the pictures, it's not much different.
Yeah, it's a good question, especially today. In the old days, it was the difference is quite clear. People knew that meat you had to look out for, but bread was be'etzem kosher. All bread, when they were gezer on Pasakum, they did it because of chassanis, because of intermarriage. Okay, there's a discussion about other things that could go wrong. Today, there are many ingredients in bread. There are many ingredients in the flour. Everything today is much more complex. So you see bread, it could be that bread is more of a kula today. A poskim say that not, but the poskim, there is a reason to compare, like you're saying, to nevela, because person wouldn't just eat stam bread. Where when it comes to the days of Chazal, Even the days of Shulchan Aruch in general, what was bread? Bread was kosher. Maybe it was paspalter, pasakum could be. But the ingredients were certainly kosher. So we have more of a chash, a person might come to eat from the bread. But I agree with you that today there's much more reason to be matir in such a case, because people know that in most places, although I have a recent case with a mashgiach who came from Europe, and that was the whole story with the but he said, well, add some bread, it's kosher. You want to be machmod pas Yisrael. I said, what? So maybe in the bakeries, a chais in some town in France, that the baguettes were all kosher and they're not using
in
lard.
Yeshiva in Berwan, they have they go and light the fire in the bakery, the get from the bakery.
Okay. In any case, it's very complicated.
What is that? What we're talking about? Lechem Isser here? Like what exactly is?
Yeah, lechem Isser could be many things. It could be tevel, could be didn't take challah from it. It could be the many ways of making bread aser, especially they were smearing the pans with lard. All different ways they could become aser, or could be paspal abayis. In any case, you have to be done each case individually. But the only clear heter we see over here is B'sar Nevela. Now, let's say a person made a neder. A person made a neder not to eat a certain food. What do you think? Person made a neder not to eat apples. Is he allowed to have apples on the table?
He's not rugul in it. He knows he can't.
Well, if he made a neder like not to eat for the rest of his life, it's one thing. But it's something which is be'etzem a dvar heter. So that the Rosh is worried about. Over another, the Rosh says that since he just answered it himself, he can also do ataras nadorim. It's not be'etzem there. Poskim want to say that a person could always be mater neder. So even though it's aser now, even if a person didn't put a seif zman on it, that b'atzim you could be matir it. So anyway, the Rosh is, I believe it was the Rosh, Shach quotes over there that since it's mitzad the neder, not to eat a certain food, but the food
is that because of the chumrah of davar sheyesh lamatirin, or
no. I was just mentioning that.
No, because that could be a nafkamina. No, if a person answers himself at Isser Olam, so there could be a tzad heter.
Yeah, maybe a nazir. Maybe that's why to put wine on the table. Yeah. Anyway, interesting discussion over there in the shach. But most of the cases, as you see over here, if it's mamish treif, it's mutter, all the other cases, for one reason or the other, are aser. Okay. So now we're going to go on now to Sif base. And we need a little bit of Gemara over here. And it'll help to see the background and to understand the general picture. I think, there's a Piskat Shuva over here that's interesting. He mentions it in the Chaveras also. The Piskat Shuva mentions about candles on the table. So they used to make candles out of all different sorts of things. So they used to make candles out of butter. Candles out of butter. Are you allowed to have a butter candle on the table? Maybe it's going to drip into the food. For that matter, shuman, let's say you had animal fat. So they used to make candles out of tallow. It's animal fat, also candles. When you had the butter mastamba would melt. There weren't candles, it would melt and it would be a liquid. So you have to worry that some of that is going to drip into the food. And on the other hand, the candles, are you worried about it? The Pesach Shabbat also be a Prima Godin, about how much are we really worried about these things happening. Today, it's not really Lamaisa that today candles not made out of these materials. The whole discussion, it says by Dikas Chametz, Taflamet Gimel or Chaim, speaks about not using chaylev. Candles were made out of chaylev. The told story in Lubavitch, the Bachar want to do an Aveda. You read so much of what kind of Avedas could you do in Lubavitch, right? So It must be so geschmack and aveda. Do aveda. So he said, chaylev, this a car. It must be gor geschmack. So he went to the store. He has to buy a candle. He gave him the chaylev. He ate a bit of the chaylev over this aveda. It's mamish not worth it. In any case, the candles used to be made out of chaylev. It's a car. As it speaks about doing bedikas chametz, you're going to be afraid. You're going to drip. Some of the chaylev is going to fall onto your kalim. It's going to make them treif, because the chaylev is animal fat. But today it's made out, the candles in general are made out of paraffin. So it's all synthetic and we don't really need to worry about these things. Although they say there was once an answer, somebody told story, some siva for Yud Aleph Nissen, a bunch of people, some bunch of fried people, they decided to look up at the Yud Aleph Nissen. They're going to make a birthday cake for the Rebbe for Yud Aleph Nissen. I heard the story was Moshe Kadlarski. So he wrote into the Rebbe. Next morning, the Rebbe came out with an answer. He said there was candles in the cake. The Rebbe said that you have to look at the candles to make sure that they were kosher. Because they speak some pasuk. You have over here, Prima Godam. Shiur brings it down. Okay. Now, what happens if there's more than one person? So here we have a Gemara. Shimon ben Gamliel said the same sugya, beginning Kol Bosor. Beis Achsonoim, you have two people going to a hotel. They came to the same hotel, to the same inn. They came from opposite directions, which is one way of saying that they didn't know each other. They came to the same inn, they're coming from different directions. One was fleshik and one was milchik, or they were preparing to become fleshik and milchik. They're going to eat in the inn, yeah. This one came with a chaticha. Chaticha is a piece, it means a piece of meat. And the other one came with a piece of cheese. And now they're going to eat in the inn. The plot thickens. So now what's going to happen? They can eat milk and meat on the same table. This one can eat as meat. This one can eat as cheese. They can eat on the same table. Why is that? So as we'll see, that since they don't really know each other, they're strangers, we don't really have to worry about them. In this context, it certainly means a chaticha, could be something else also, but in this, certainly in this context, it means meat. The next line of the Gemara says, okay, so we're not worried that they're going to share. Then the Gemara says, when is it asr with tfisa achas? So the meaning of this word tfisa is going to end up being a machlekes rishonim, which is going to reflect on the final halacha. So we have to think about this a little bit. Poshta pshat, the Rashi learns tfisa achas is that they mamish had it touching each other, like they both ate on the same plate or something like that, that it was wrapped together and they were touching each other. So even if it was cold, you still need to rinse, still need hadacha. That we'll learn in Simon Tzaddik Aleph, what happens if cold meat and cold cheese touch each other. But it's only also but tfisa achas. So the Gemara, tfisa achas, I mean, who would do that? I mean, l'chatchila, they're going to put together and have it touching each other. So I said, no, ela kain tfisa achas. It's kain tfisa, like tfisa achas. It's like one tfisa. So what is going on over here with the word tfisa? So to figure out what tfisa is, so you have to look in the Gemara. What does the word tfisa means? We have two Gemaras that are quoted. Rashi speaks about it. Taisus, all the Rishonim speak about it. Taisus brings two pirushim for two different Gemaras. We have one Gemara in Aveda Zara and one Gemara in Baba Bosor. According to the one in Aveda Zara, it's talking about location. And according to the other one, it's talking about ownership. The Gemara, so tfusas abayis is when people inherited something and they're all heirs together in the inheritance, so they're bound together financially. The halacha is not like that interpretation. The halacha is the tfisa achas that it's talking about l'gabe Aveda Zara. It's speaking over there about Merkulis. There was an Aveda Zara that the way the goyim would worship the Aveda Zara was by throwing stones at the Aveda Zara. So the stones that were thrown at the Aveda Zara had a din of Tekrevis Aveda Zara, all discussion in the Gemara, what exactly is. You're not allowed to use those stones. Right? So how far ad Mosai? How far away from this Merkulis do you have to answer the stones? You can't touch any stones in the whole world. You can't touch any stones because it's a Hemshech. So you look and you see the ones that are closer to Merkulis, they're closer to the Aveda Zara. So then they're considered part of the Aveda Zara. The ones that you can see for whatever reason. Let's say there would be a fence. There would be some sort of dividing line between the Chelik of the Aveda Zara and the Chelik which is not the Aveda Zara. So then the ones which are Tfisa Achas, which are close together, they're still Behemshech to Aveda Zara, so those are prohibited. But as long as you have some way of telling, of distinguishing between the stones that were Aveda Zara and the stones were not Aveda Zara, so then it's okay. You can use the other stones. So that's in your Kain Tfisa. So those are the two days. Pick a chart over here. So what's Tfisa Achas? So the first Pirush, just to make it simple, he brings the first Pirush of Taisus. Second Pirush, we'll call one Rashi, one Taisus. We'll call the first Pirush and the second Pirush. The first Pirush says Tfisa Achas. So first of all, what's Tfisa Achas? The halach is not Tfisa Achas, it's Kain Tfisa Achas. According to the first Pirush, what was the problem? That the milk and the meat were B'kei Le'echot. So that's for sure also what's going on over here. And according to the other Pirush, but there were Tfisa Achas that Hasedim Meshalmim B'shutfis, that they're partners in the food. So they went in even on the bill in a restaurant. I mean, it's interesting. We don't paskin like this, but according to the Mashal is worried about it. Torah is worried about it. Torah brings it down. We don't paskin like that, but
wouldn't that explain why the Gemara points out that they're coming from different places?
Yeah, the shaila is, how would that explain it? I mean, how did they're shutfim and they're coming from different places? Okay, but
no, because they're coming from different places, it's not a problem. It was only usru b'tfisa achas when they're
because they were shutfim. Yeah, but evidently the Gemara takes as the davar aposhet tfisa achas al gadaitach. Like it doesn't even make any sense to say that that's what that Shimon Gamliel was coming to teach us. Doesn't even make any sense. The Gemara backs off this pshat right away. According to both Pirushim, it backs off this pshat. It's not something plausible that we need Rabbi Shimon Gamliel to tell us such a thing. That's tfisa achas. So the Gemara says it's that doesn't make sense. That's only the Havamina. According to the Maskana, it's Kain Tfisa Achas. So what's Kain Tfisa Achas? So according to the first Pirush, there's no hacker. So just like over there by the Merkulis, you couldn't tell which stones were which. There was no hacker between these stones and that stones. Like imagine over there, they would have a sign saying Merkulis worshippers, throw your stones only on the right-hand side of the sign. Okay, so then you know the stones on the left-hand side, you don't have to worry. There's Shlomo Zalman didn't know where to put his stones. The Aveda Zara doesn't mean they don't know how to worship the Aveda Zara. So wherever it was designated for the Aveda Zara, so those are taka aser, because there's a hacker. But as long as there's a hacker, the rest of them would be okay. That's the pshat in the Gemara. Now, according to the other Pirush, and any time that they know each other, they don't have to be mamashutfim, but if they know each other, so then we're worried they're going to come and share with each other. What's a nafkamina? So the big nafkamina over here is, does a hacker work? So since the whole problem, according to the first Pirush, and again, we paskin like the first Pirush, Shulchan Aruch paskin like the first Pirush, both the Shach and Taz bring down Mashal, who wants to say like bring down from the tour that he mentions the second day also, but la halacha it's not brought down. So we say that it's male hacker. The reason I'm even mentioning it is because when it comes to decide what's good as a hacker, what's not, we have to keep in the back of our mind that even though we don't paskin like that, but that those that say b'chala hacker doesn't work, that's the nafkamina. Because according to the second Pirush, a hacker doesn't help. Because that's not the problem in the first place. The problem in the first place is ownership. What the heck are going to help if they're shutfim? Or if they know each other, so there's a hacker. Well, who says that's going to help according to the second Pirush? The Gemara's Bachal not talking about that, but according to the first Pirush, and that's the Din Shulchan Aruch, a hacker helps, and that's what's going to be the discussion over here. A lot of the discussion, especially in Ramah, is what helps when it comes to a hacker. What's good as a hacker and what's not good as a hacker. It comes from Rishonim. whole discussion, and that's what we're going to discuss over here. So many people are more familiar with this. If you never learned Bosor B'Cholah before, you didn't learn the Siman. So people, before they get married, you learn Dinei Archakas. So in Yeridei Sim Kuf Tzadikei, you have Dinei Archakas. And right over there, one of the things, one of the first Sifim over there speaks about the Isser eating B'Shulchan Echad. That when the woman's needed, they have to keep Archakas, you're not allowed to eat at the same table. Except if there's a hacker. So you have many of the poskim say that the same din applies to this hacker as that hacker, and they learn out from here to there. Some say you can't compare them. So you have in Piskei Dinim, that's one of the simonim in Piskei Dinim, that there's a controversy whether it's really that Tzemach Tzedek wrote it, or it was written by very, very knowledgeable, to put it mildly, Chassid, who actually wrote that simon. There seems to be no controversy about the one we learned before from Pei Zayin. We had the last 3 sifim over there that we discussed last week that I recommended you take a look at. It's a very good chazara. It's done all the days over there. That's from Taka from Tzemach Tzedek, but this in Kuf Tzadikei or Chakas seems to be a much bigger suffix, whether that's really from the Tzemach Tzedek or not. But in any case, it's certainly a Bar Samcha, and he brings down many dinim of heker from over here in Sim Peches in Bosor B'Cholah. So over here the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, and over there Shulchan Aruch Paskins, that a hacker helps in order to keep the people from sharing. So this is the din Shulchan Aruch.
Can you apply the heter of heker to one person on Shulchan on his own table with 2?
Very good question. Machlekes HaPaskim. There are poskim that are machmir about that also. There's a controversial. Not a clear heter. There are matirim, but not all the poskim are matir. Okay, so now this is the mechaber now. Hada asul aleis al shulchan dafka b'shnei bnei adam makirim zeh. When the people know each other, afilu hem makpidim zel zeh. We're going to come back to this idea. So in other words, you have people that are makpidim zel zeh. They don't eat other people's food. Not only during COVID, but they don't eat other people. They don't want to touch somebody else's food, whatever the case is. So even if they know each other, but they're not about to share lunch. You have 2 co-workers, they know each other, they're eating lunch together, but they don't share. The kids come to yeshiva. You send your child off to yeshiva with lunch. You never know what he's going to end up eating over there. This one switches with that one. This one likes this one likes that. And make a chlippin over there. Who knows what they're eating? The children generally not makpid themselves. Okay, but other people you can have shnei bnei adam makirim zeh. So even if the makpid themselves, nevertheless it's still aser. Aval achsanoyim. But if you have these 2 achsanoyim over here, shein makirim zeh, which is the idea that one came from the tzaf and one came from the darim, so then it's mutter. People that don't know each other, we're not worried that they're going to share their food. Vafilu makirim. And even the case that's aser, because they're makirim zeh, we're going to come back to this soon. Im aser shum hacker, if they made a hacker, kagain. So what's the example in Mechaber brings? Kagain. Shakol echad eichel al mappa shalei. That each one is eating on his own tablecloth, his own serving abasis, some sort of tray or some sort of tablecloth. Even if they're eating on the same cloth, but they put a loaf of bread in between them, as a heker is also mutter. So you see in the Makar Adin it mentions a third thing which the Rama is going to bring down, which is a menorah. A menorah. So we have to before we go into the pratim, let's just talk about what and why things help. So if people are on a different tablecloth, especially today, you have a what do you call that? Not a tablecloth, no, the thing you put your foot on. Placemat, thank you very much. So it's usually nicker, which is the fleishka placemat, which is the milchika placemat. Not always, but it could be nicker. The thing itself is miyuchad by the tsura or the color, that one is fleishik and one is milchik. But even if not, it's clear that that itself is a separation. The shaila becomes, what happens if that's the normal way of eating? We want a shaila in a place. Normally, you don't give a hechsher to a place that's serving milchiks and fleishiks, but there are some places. What do you do in a hospital cafeteria or something like that? And people are buying packaged food. So they're selling sandwiches. So there's a cheese sandwich there. There's a meat sandwich there. Everything's wrapped up and sealed. And as a hechsher, they're going to come sit down in the dining room, and you take a tray, like in a dining hall, and you put on the tray whatever it is you buy your food. You have in the rest areas like that sort of system over there. You take a tray and you put the food on the tray and you're going to sit down at the table. So everybody's on mapa shalei. So the people at the table, each one's sitting. So let's say one's eating fleishik and one's eating milchik. We're going to say each one has its own serving tray, but how much of a hecker is that if that's the normal way to eat? So maybe if it's only a money, a temporary thing the person is going, so the whole surah is not to ruggle, but if the person eats there every single day, even though it might be mapa shalei, it's mutter, but there are poskim that say that since it has to be some sort of shinui from the regular way of eating, they would question this heter. In general, there has to be something, in order to be a hecker, there has to be something different than usual. So eating each one on a separate mappa, you don't do that unless you have a reason to do it normally. Okay, so mappa shalei is good as a hecker. What about the pas, and what about the meneda? So on the one hand, the pas is also always on the table. We just said that before. Pas is ruggle to be on the table. So what kind of hecker is that? The answer is when the pas is on the table, you eat it. What's it doing on the table? For decorations, you're putting on the table to eat it. Has to be a pas, is that Rambam was going to say that you don't eat from this pas. So then you have a pas. What's a loaf of bread doing on the table, and you're not eating from it? So then it's there for a reason. It also, you look at the lashon and Shulchan Aruch, neisnim b'neiim pas leheker. It has to be between the two of them. So let's say, for example, you have again, there's a Shabbos table. Normally everything's fleishik, but let's say you have lechem mishnah. So you have a challah you cut, and you have another challah you don't cut. Can you use that second one as a heker? So on the one hand, the lechem mishnah is normally on the table. There's some people take it off the table. There's an inyan. I believe Chaim No brings it down. It's brought down in Svarim. I think I saw it also in Ktseisa Shulchan. I think he brings it down. Dafka to leave the lechem mishnah on the table. That it shouldn't be taken off the table. But even if it's on the table, you don't put it between the one eating. Let's say you have a person that can't eat fleishik and they're eating milchik. Okay, so to put in the pas, normally it's not put dafka between the two people. So the fact that the lechem mishnah is always on the table doesn't invalidate it to be used as a heker, because you're making a shinui. It has to be some sort of shinui. To be a heker has to be a shinui. So you're putting between the two people the location, that would be sufficient in order to change it. So let's go. Yeah, you have a heker, it's mutter. So we're gonna come back to the meneda in a second. I'm not sure why the PowerPoint was made like that, but we have to first go back to this idea of the makirim. So the Gemara says, Rav Yemer bar Shalmi al-Abaye, Shnei achim umakpidim zel ze. What happens if you have two brothers and they makpid on each other? What's the din? Are they allowed to eat at the same table and one milchik and one fleishik? So on the one hand, they're achin, obviously they know each other. Makirim zeh. Does makpidim zeh help? So Amalei, so he answers him basically leiplug. The chachamim made a gezerah, and they don't differentiate between makpid, nishpagin. Along their makirim, they differentiate between makirim and not makirim. That we saw from the Mechaber here. So if they're makirim, it's also. Even if they're makpidim, we don't differentiate that. But if they're not makirim, then we'll be make. Okay, so this is really the mucker for that din. Because the chachamim say lo plug. What's the lashon I use? Yemer kol asrikim masurim asriki baisus mutarim. So this is a din in Ilchas Pesach. So you have in Ilchas Pesach, it discusses when you're making matzah for Pesach, are you allowed to make designs? So there was the srikin and the ones, the bakers. So the bakers of Baisus, they had a patent over there. So they had this, like you have forms to make cookies, and you can make designs on it. So they had these designs that they could work very fast, and they could make shapes of birds and all different sorts of things on the matzahs. So people would have these fancy matzahs. This is one of the makedas. You want to know whether you can bite into a cookie or a matzah that has letters on it. So that's the whole, one of the makedas that speaks over there. Does it apply to letters? Does it also apply to tziyurim? And how did they eat these matzahs over there that had pictures of birds on it? Okay, it's the Shailan El Shabbos. Don't want to get sidetracked. In any case, so they said that how are you going to allow them to do that? That you're going to allow Srike Baisus, you're going to allow them to do it, so they can do it fast enough. They can do the whole thing in 18 minutes. But regular people are going to try to do it. They're not going to be able to pull this off. So they're not such experts. So that's the Inyan of Lei Plug. Call Srike Nasurim, Srike Baisus Mutarim. You're going to answer everybody else, and the Baisus you're going to allow. So that's the idea. If they're even though they makpid themselves, we're not going to allow it. Now the Mashal, so therefore the Shulchan Aruch learns like this: the Shnei Achin is not dafke. It means anytime makirin. The Mashal wants to say that it's only because of Shnei Achin makpid themselves. He wants to differentiate. We don't pass like the Mashal. Anyway, this is basically the makar for the din that we just learned. So the maskana is the Chacham lechilkum b'gzeirasim v'lachin gam achim makpidim tzrichim losim heker. So you might think that the achim and the makpid themselves, what kind of business is this? It must be a bad relationship. The relationship's soured, so maybe you should allow it. No, they still need a heker. Okay. Let's say you have shnei anoshim makirim zeh makpidim shloi lechol zeh. So that's what we just saw in the Machaber. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins gam bezeh chacham lechil b'zeirasim v'lachin tzrichim heker. That also we say lei plug, we say lo plug, and you need a heker. The Mashal is quoted by both the Shach and Taz bring him down, but we don't pass like the Mashal. That if they're makpid on each other, so then they're not called makirim, and then you don't need a heker. So the Mashal ends up being makel over here, and it's only the achin that we say lo plug. But the Shulchan Aruch paskins that it's not only achin, it's anybody that knows each other. Nevertheless, you need a heker. Shach and Tas both paskan like the Shulchan Aruch, but they go further. But if they hate each other, then not. Where does this come from? So that same Rosh that we quoted before about neder. So you have different cases of neder. You have neder regarding not eating a certain type of food. Then you have a neder. The person makes a neder not to eat with a certain person. So they're enemies. He makes a neder. He's not going to eat with him. So such a case. So then we don't have to worry. I made a neder, he's not going to eat. So then we don't need a heker anymore. The neder is good enough for the heker. By the way, what's halachic definition of a seina? If you didn't speak to somebody for 3 days, not because you didn't run into each other. But Dafki didn't speak to each other for 3 days. You had the opportunity and you didn't speak to him. So then that's already together.
They don't share each other's stuff.
This that they don't share each other's stuff, we just learned doesn't help.
That's called.
They don't share.
That's what makpid means.
This is even more. This is not only the makirim zeh, and they just don't eat from each other, but they don't dafke, hate each other. Makpidim zeh could be because he's Easternist, he likes his food, he doesn't like the other one's food. Whatever the case is, you don't want to share food. He's afraid he's going to get COVID. I don't know. Afraid he's going to get the Black Plague. We're talking about years ago. Who knows what he could get? Doesn't eat from other people's food. Doesn't have to do with being makpid on the other person. I mean, most cases, you have people go to a dining hall. They're sitting there. They know their fellow workers over there. Oh, you want to share lunch? You don't have to be pretty good friends to share lunch. Okay.
Pretty easy to be a seina.
No. That's why you have a mitzvah Avos Yisrael.
We're going more into the types of hekers. I have a question on that, but if there's
you have a question on heker, you have a question on the
heker.
Okay, yeah, we're just really starting heker now.
Okay.
So we have this whole Ramah. Which is going to speak about this. This is not even the end of the Ramah, but this is the part of the Ramah that speaks about the union of heker. Okay, so we said the two that are mentioned by the Machaber is a separate placemat, separate tablecloth, or to have a lechem there. So it's interesting, the Tzemach quotes it, but they say it has to be gveik tzas. Has to be gveik tzas. It has to be something which is a little bit elevated. It has to be something which is visible. We'll speak about soon exactly how high that has to be. But the main thing is that it has to be a hecker. It has to be something which is unusual. If you're eating from the bread, that it's no good. So it's only when you don't eat from that pas. So you can see in the picture over there, here's mapas nefrodes, that you have separate tablecloths, and then you have a hecker. So here you have a hecker, so you have a plant. So if the plant is not normally on the table, the plant's perfect for a hecker, no problem. What if you put a bread? The Mechaber said it's good to have pas lecker. So Ramah points out that the Mechaber doesn't disagree with this. He doesn't say yesh shame and dafke if you don't eat from it. He's explaining pshat Mechaber that it's only if you don't eat from the pas. But if you eat from it, it's not going to remind you. What happens every day when you eat this pas and it's on the table and you eat from the bread on the table? So what kind of hecker is that? It's the same as normal. Now, another case where you haven't their shame to speak about a pitcher or some sort of klei shtia, something you're drinking from. But if you put on the table a keli that you drink from, and normally it's not on the table, so since this is not normally on the table, then it's a hecker, even though you can drink from it. So that's a difference between the pas and the pitcher, or whatever klei shtia it happens to be that you're drinking from. The pas, since it's normally on the table, the nakuda is not one's solid, one's liquid. The nakuda is it normally on the table, it's not normally on the table. So if it's something which is normally on the table like pas, so then once you eat from it, so it's ois hecker. It's no longer a hecker. But if it's something which is not normally on the table, the fact that it's on the table automatically makes it a hecker. You used it, that doesn't disqualify it as a hecker if it's not normally on the table. Now, if every Shabbos you have a certain keli that you put on the table, a certain pitcher used for Shabbos, and it goes on the table, and every Shabbos like that, so the fact that you don't have it during the week, it's there for Shabbos, that's still something which is regular, then it's not a hecker on Shabbos. If you happen to have somebody that can't eat flesh, they're eating milchak on the table. In our world, this is not going to happen because the person's going to have a separate placemat anyway, and that's going to be the hecker. Because we're makbid not to have milchaks and fleshiks without a separate mappa. But as far as din hecker, it's really more negated to us these protein lagabe hecker in terms of practical application over there in the dinim of archakas, because the same din of a hecker. So over there, even if you drink from the keli, since it's not normally on the table, it would be a hecker. But kol shkenim nosu sham meneira. And for sure, if it's something that has no shaykhs really to eating, like a meneira or something else on the table, here you have a plant on the table, it's a hecker. But the meneira, as the Nesa Kalim point out, also has to be something that's not normally on the table. If people are eating a meal at night, so you also have to have a meneira on the table. We're not talking about a Hanukkah meneira over here. We're talking about a regular light. So that was the way they had light in those days. They had a meneira. That some sort of keli, which was full of some sort of fuel, and then you would light it. So if you take a meneira and you put it on the table in the middle of the day, then it's a hecker. Who needs a hecker in the middle of the day? You don't need a meneira in the middle. You need a hecker. You don't need a meneira in the middle of the day. If you put it there at night and you change it from its regular place, it's normally in the middle of the table, and you put it between the two people, then it's also a hecker. You made some sort of shinui. So the examples over here are all really lav dafka. So you have the map is in a category by itself, but the other things that you're placing something on the table between the two people, Mr. Milchak and Mr. Fleshik, so the pas and the pitcher and the meneira, it's not the vart, these particular kalim. It's the idea of whether it's normally on the table and is it normally used, or is it something unusual that's going to serve as a hecker. So the pas, if you don't eat it from it, then it's good as a hecker. If you eat from it, it's no good as a hecker, because you're always eating from it. The klishti, if it's something which is always on the table, so then it's also not a hecker, unless you put it on the table and you say, today it's always on the table. But now, since you're fleshik and you're milk and I'm milchik, so now we're not going to drink from it. It's also a hecker, because it's put there for a different purpose than it's normally put there. then it's a hecker because you have this pitcher. What's doing on the empty pitcher on the table? But if it's something which is not normally on the tables, then the fact that you drink from it doesn't invalidate it for use as a hecker.
It's not a
meneda. It's not like a meneda. Kol shkein nosa shom meneda. It's a kol shkein as long as it's something unusual. But if it's the usual placement and time for a meneda, then it's not a hecker.
It's not a problem of them both drinking from this kli if they're one is having milchik, one is having flesh.
That's why I brought the example of a pitcher drinking from the same cuss. We're going to speak about soon.
So, if I'm understanding correctly,
We're going to have a Ramah, Reb Klonimus. This is one of the dinim we learned from Reb Klonimus. Yeah, we're going to have that soon. Yeah.
So the common denominator between all of these is that something irregular is happening. Either the fact that there's pas, which is regular, but the fact that you're not eating it from it, that's what's irregular. Or the klisha shaisim menu, it could be either you never have it there, and the fact that it's there is what's irregular, or if it's always there, what's irregular is that you're not drinking from it.
Right. Yeah. It's got to be. That's exactly. That's pshat the hecker. The pshat in the hecker is that that there's something unusual that's going to remind you, and you're not going to come to take from each other.
How can this at all be compared to the hecker for a nida? Because the chashash is totally different. Like, I mean, for nida, you could eat the same food. You just have, here you can't eat from the same food.
The vart is a reminder. You need what serves as a reminder. And there are poskim that hold that you can't compare the two cases. L'maisa, we see most of the poskim do compare them because the vart is, although there are differences, but the idea is it sufficient to remind the people, oh, this is normally I can eat this. Normally I like this type of cheese, but I can't eat it now because I'm fleshik. And here they remind each other, oh, she's in need now. In the chat over, if placements are always on the table, then this is usual. Okay, so let's go a bit further. So, mentioned before, the Michael Chayfetz Gaveya Miyat has to be a little bit high. So it doesn't really say, the poskim don't really say how high it has to be. It has to be something that you recognize. So they say that it can't be a slice of bread, shouldn't be a key, something like that, something that's flat. So I saw the Rabbi Farkash in the Sefer Nilchas Nida. So he says a sfar, a makkah for it also, that to say that it's the height of a loaf of bread. What's pshat height of a loaf of bread? We see that a loaf of bread is a hecker. So it must be that's good enough, that's enough height to be called a hecker. So if you have the height of a loaf of bread, then that would be sufficient. But something which is flat on the table, even if it's between the two of them, that's not sufficient if it's low. So that's one condition. Okay, another condition that it has to be between the people that are eating. So over here, so if the people are eating on the opposite side of the table, one is here and one's here. So I guess the blue tablecloth is, I'm wondering why this is not already a Zundara Mappa, because it looks like this is the milk, this is the fleshek, although all the cutlery is the same color, maybe just the design of the tablecloth. In any case, if the fleshek people are on the same side of the table, then putting the hecker over here is not going to help. I mean, it looks very nice, the table, but it's not going to help as a hecker. If they're eating on the opposite sides across from each other, then it's going to help. Then it's going to be a hecker. Why is a placemat sufficient if it's not high? Because it's the placemat is, like I said, there's one category for the things which are a hecker, and the placemat is the mappa is being kaveya makom la'atzmei. It's almost as if they're not eating at the same table. Whole problem is shulchan echad. When you make yourself a separate mappa, it's ki'ilu, it's a separate shulchan. It doesn't go into the whole category over here. And and it has to be something that's not normally there. So here you have this candle. So if you see the sun is shining in, I guess. So then it's unusual. Why are you having a candle burning over here in the middle of the Suda? Why should you take a broom on the table to put a lamp on the table? So it has to be something that's not normally there. The Paskim speak about, let's say there's not, people are not washing and there's not normally bread on the table, so would that help? Normally eat from the bread over here, the people are not washing, so maybe that would help too. That's the word is with something which is not rogel. That's what he says, a menorah b'shos hayom, if it's during the daytime, so then the menorah helps. And so too, the shinim makam makavu, if you change it from its regular place, and then it also ends up being a heker. So here is a klishtia. This is a little bit unusual klishtia over here. The guy took a whole barrel to the table. I don't think you need something so drastic, but so that's what the Ramah said about the klishtia. If it's not normally there, so then even if you use it, it's okay. That's what the Ramah says. It can be a hacker. The Bach says it's not a hacker. The Bach is cheshish for the other pirush of tfisa achas, main kain tfisa achas. So he's worried about that day that says b'chala hacker doesn't help. So once you use it, it's certainly always hacker, and the Bach uses that svara as well to say, put that together with the idea that since you're using it, the only time it's going to be a hacker is if you don't use it. And the paskim like the Ramah. But if you don't use it, even if it's something like I mentioned before, if you take a picture and it's normally on the table, but now you decided you're not going to use it, so that itself, that you're not using it, that itself makes it a hacker. What if you change your own makam kavua? That vaistois is not enough. Yeah, that seems to be insufficient. Okay. The Achreinim speak about other cases. Can you make a shamer? A policeman over here, very imaginative. In the case of a hacker, they say a shamer, it doesn't help because the shamer is going to watch it the whole time. I mean, you're hiring somebody to watch it the whole time. The hacker is there the whole time that you're reading. The shamer, he's there, he's not there. He has to remind you. So that's something which is doesn't help. Now, this is a very interesting din. You see at the beginning of Machaber, although Lashon Machaber was that's not lafuke one person. It's lafuke the ones that are not makirim. If they're not makirim zazaz, then we're not worried about putting on the same table. So dafke, this is what we said in Sif Aleph, that you're not allowed to put milchuk and fleishik on the same table. It says dafke b'shnei adam makirim. What about one person? Let's say you're sitting yourself by the table. So somebody left. You want to eat fleishik, and somebody left a bottle of milk on the table. Are you allowed to eat there when the bottle of milk's on the table? It's machlekes haposkim. Even if you by yourself, and even if you make a hacker. So let's say, and that's already contemporary usage where we don't put things on the same table, and you're going to be using either the milk is on a milchaka placemat, or the milk is on the milchaka table, and you made a fleishka placemat, and you're eating fleishiks. Many poskim hold you have to take that milk off the table. You're by yourself. Need a hacker for yourself too, because you might forget there's some milk over there. You're thirsty. A person might take some milk, or vice versa with the fleishik. Anyway, so machlekes a poskim. There are those that allow it b'yochid, but many aser it in such a case. Noshim mafridim bein aseidim ein tzarech. If there are people in between, so you have in yeshiva people reach across. So you have Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. So Reuben reaches across Shimon to go and take some food from Levi. So the emphasis is Lashon is Anoshim. So you have maybe Reuben is reaching over Shimon and Levi to take some food from Yehuda. Derech Eretz Plishtim. Yeah, that kind of Derech Eretz. Any case, if there are people in between, so then again you don't need a hacker.
That was not moil for Nida though, right?
Excuse me?
That one's not moil for Nida though, right?
That's also machlekes haposkim. There are many people in between. The presence of people there, in Chakas B'Fnei Acherim as a whole. Parsha I heard from Rabbi Feil Shakol Vashom that the Rabbi told in Yechidus that if people are makbid on Chakas B'Fnei Acherim, the presence of the people will break it. But here we're talking about people sitting in between. People sitting in between, many poskim allow it, Lagab and Nida also, if they're there b'shas ma'isa. So too, just take this last one off. You have of the Nesa Kelim Shulchan Aruch mention, if you're so far away on the table you can't reach, it's also many allow it in such a case. You don't have to worry. You might get up and move, but nevertheless, as long as you stay in your place, you don't need a hecker. And this is a very interesting shaila. This is very much a judgment call, and the whole discussion of poskim, there's not real clear conclusion about this. Hecker shalei b'shas achila. In other words, you're in the middle of a fleishka meal, and the baby needs a bottle. So let's say you're in the middle of, you're eating fleishik, and then you get up to the milchik side and you start preparing milchik. Or you have, this child doesn't need fleishik, and this child doesn't need milchik, and you have to prepare separate food for them. This child is allergic, whatever the case is, and you have to prepare the other min. Are we worried? Do you need a hecker at such a time when you're preparing the food and you're not eating the food? The person that's fleishik has to worry about preparing the milchik and cases like this. So that is largely a judgment call, but it's just mentioning it here, just to be alert to that possibility that there is such a inyan. Okay, and here we have, you asked about drinking from the cup. So this is the end of the Ramah. So we are sort of out of the realm of hecker. It's all in the same siman, and it's all in the same sif base, and it's even in the same Ramah. But we switch gears now to the din of kelim. So up till now, the only keli we're talking about is the table. We're talking about eating at the same table. Can you have milchiks and fleishiks on the same table? When can you have? We're just worried about sharing a table. But what about sharing a cup? What about sharing a salt shaker? What about all these things? And we're going to see later on in Peites Sif Dalid, what about other kelim? What about a knife? And things of the sort. So this is, although you wouldn't recognize it right away, but it's like a new topic now in the Ramah. It's all on the general idea of keeping things from getting mixed up. But now we're talking about the kelim. The yield, the heating, shalei, lishtes, mekele, echot. And you have to be careful not to drink from the same keli. So this is Rav Klonimus, I'm thinking of Yehuda, there it's mentioned in Beis Yosef, that they wouldn't drink from the same keli. One was eating milchiks, one was eating fleishik. You shouldn't drink from the same cup, even water. Why? Because the one person was eating fleishik, and then he drank from the, I have to tell you, I just thought about this, so good we were learning it tonight. So I ate the supper before I have the shiur, and I ate fleishik. So then I have to drink in the middle of the shiur because I'm, I know it's hard listening for 2.5 hours. I don't know how you guys do it, but it's not so easy talking for 2.5 hours either, you should know. So every once in a while I need to drink something. So I have a milchik, a cup. I say, oh, I have Klonimus. I have fleishik in my mouth. Here is not with two different people. Here's the same person. So you ate fleishik. So you have to do something before you have from the milchik cup. And the poskim say it's assumed that you have fleishiks on your lips, and when you're going to drink from the milchik cup, then it's going to get stuck on the cup. So therefore, if you have Mr. Fleishik drank from the cup, we're worried that there's some fleishik over there. Mr. Milchik doesn't have a cup. He said, oh, can I have a drink of your water? Then he drinks from the same cup. So we have a problem. So therefore, you shouldn't drink from the same cup. So the Nesa Kelim speak about what happens if you clean the cup. How is the whole discussion in the Hilchas Derech Eretz? Do you have to clean the cup beforehand? The Shach points out that even if it's two different tables, you're not worried about other things getting mixed up. But here you could get mamish mixed up. It's coming into your mouth now directly, not from the table you forgot. Here you're aware, but you don't know who's paying attention to that small amount. So it's actually very interesting, but that's for sure not that official or Shotera. And this thing and Bechal is that called bittul? Is it not called bittul? What's the problem here exactly? That you didn't do the waiting time in between. But nevertheless, it's called the taruvus bas b'chalav, and you have to be careful, so you shouldn't drink from the same keli. Agav, it's we see from this that people used to drink taka from the same keli. They say that echolzu, the Rabbi Rashab said echolzu twice. So it brings down the Rishimas there from Frierdiker Rebbe. So there was a big machlekes in that city when the Rabbi Rashab said echolzu. So one of them said that one of the things which was like sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, that one of them wouldn't drink from the cup that the other one used. And by Chassidim, such a thing was like it's a real deep sign of a deep sinas chinam. Wouldn't drink from the same cup. In any case, the Ramah says one's milchik, one's fleishik, you shouldn't drink from the same cup. Others say, well, as long as you wipe it off, you know that is sufficient. But nevertheless, it's something you have to be aware of. The kolshke, and how much more so you can't eat from the same bread. So if one had some bread that he was using for fleishiks, so then you can't use that bread for milchiks. And this is a very, very important din, just a very pushed application. You have leftover challah from Shabbos. So the Shabbos was eaten on a fleishka table. We're gonna have more of it in the next simon today with siftalit. But when you're eating bread and bread is on the table, so people pass the bread, then you slice a piece of bread. So the hands are dirty with remnants of food. So what happens? You have leftover challah from Shabbos. It was on the fleishka table with chicken, and even without children. If you have children, so mamish, everything gets decorated with the oil and fats and things like this. But even without, people's hands are not necessarily so clean. Can't be sure that there was no remnant of the let's say it's a fleishik from Shabbos. So then there's leftover challah. You want to make yourself a grilled cheese sandwich with the leftover challah. It's a problem. Once that bread was on the fleishik table, you have a problem. It will cut with the fleishik knives, and you have another problem, which we'll see soon in the next the end of the next simon. But even the fact that it was somebody was eating fleishik from that bread, so for somebody to eat from the other min from that same bread is a problem. We'll talk about it more in the next simon. I want to make a break soon. And so too, the minig is the minig that you should have a separate salt, a keli of salt for the milchiks and the fleishiks. Why? Sometimes they would dip the food directly in the salt, and some of the food remains in the salt. So in other words, you have somebody has a piece of chicken, and he wants to put some salt on it. So they didn't have. They're not talking now about salt shakers. They're talking about a keli or receptacle that has salt in it. So you can stick your fingers into the salt, and you can put some on your food. Or you take a shortcut and you put the food directly in. The emes is even if you put your fingers into the salt and take some out, it could be that there's oil or grease, something on your fingers. Why is the melech is a bigger yachsin than the bread? So if you touched it with your fingers, it could be the same thing. In any case, even more so, if nobody's taking a pulka of chicken and wiping it on the side of the bread, but it's shayach, at least the way they had in those days. You can go and dip it into the salt, and then you could have some amish pieces of meat in the salt, and you're going to take that salt and you use it with the milk. So therefore, the minig was they would have a separate kelish for fleishik, a salt receptacle, one for fleishik, one for milk. Now, this chash we don't have, because we use salt shakers. So nobody's going to stick meat down into the holes to get inside the salt. Nevertheless, many of the poskim write that you should have separate. And there are a number of reasons which are given for it. And one of the reasons is because b'chal the mishmush yadayim, that the hands are dirty, and then from the outside of the keli you could end up having something stuck to the outside, just like you would for the bread. There's a grease on the outside, especially if they're children. And imashum ha would be the same thing for a bottle of ketchup or something like this, to use the same one for the milchiks and fleishiks. A bigger problem with salt, and it's not just salt, it applies to all spices, is a very common question, and that's really more fitting for Siman Tzadik Beis. We'll speak about it towards the end of Siman Tzadik Beis. I believe So we speak about the Indian of Zaya. So if you take a salt shaker and you have a pot of soup and you shake the salt over the soup, so what's with the Zaya, the para, the steam that's coming out of the soup? So does that have the kayach to make the salt shaker fleshik? You have the same Indian when you have these hoods hanging over a stovetop, where there's steam coming out, and even if you have separate burners, this one's fleshik, this one's milchik. So that's something which is a discussion for Simon Sadik base about this Indian, but that's why many are careful about that, especially for salt. It's used in almost everything. Other sorts of spices have to have a completely different set of spices. You have to have a chayes, paprika, with basil, with who knows what, all different, a set of milchiks and a set of fleshik. So as long as you're careful that the steam is not going into it, they're not usually things which are used on the table. Maybe oregano people use on pizza, I don't know, but then you use it on fleshiks. And this is not bucking spices to know what's used for what. But if it's something which is commonly used, it's kadai to be machmer. Whether it's mamish required al pidin is debatable, especially if one is careful. So a simple eitzah when you're using these sort of spices is to take it and you put it in your hand and then you put it in. And you have a whole discussion in the dinataris. Like a person has the hands tummy, does it to make the kedera tummy when you have the steam connecting them, but we're not dealing with the dinamatumutara. Okay, so I'll take some questions and then we shall take a hafsaka. That's why Fabrengen should be parv. Okay, some places the gezeir sheyev shalamid bay. We have a glass shot glasses we use for kiddush and shul, and some of it's flesh of kiddush. Any problem using those shot glasses during the dairy kiddush on Shavuos? But once the kalim are washed, you're not really worried about it, but you're touching on an issue which is really, we'll continue with the Simpetesiv Dalid about the whole idea of separate kalim. There are people today, that have separate drinking glasses. They use the same milchiks and fleshiks. So how much of this is chumrah? How much of this is required in halacha? So we'll talk about that soon. What the chal is a separate issue. Many homes like in the fleshik oven. Yeah, good point.
What's the status of a buffet?
A buffet shouldn't have milchiks and fleshiks there.
If there is.
What, you talking about a kosher buffet? Yeah, I mean,
would a hacker help? Putting a milchik and fleshik sign on it, or?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Once you have a lot of people around, technically speaking, if it's separate, you can have, separate shulchanos also. So if you have a separate shulchan, so then there's no issue. But yeah, it all depends on the particular situation, what it looks like. Okay, we're gonna take a 10-minute break now. We'll continue at 8:30 Mirz Hashem. Okay. Fine. I just noticed over here the Piskei Tshuva brought down about this issue of having the presence of other people equaling a hacker. So he says, look what I wrote in Kuf Tzadikei in Dinei Archokas. There's a Masos Binyamin, he quotes in both and compares the two cases. We see the Piskei Tshuva does compare the two. Okay, do you need a hacker for food which is not usher by itself and might have yisurim like fruit and insects? Depends if you bedilim in there or not. If a person is rugil, it keeps away from foods or food you're machmer on Pesach, so then that's not a Yisur al pi din. Maybe it's mitzad neder. That's people think that these dinim don't really apply. We had before that the Shach spoke about the din of the dar, and Piskei Tshuva also brings it down. And this whole discussion with the Rosh about the person made a neder. The emesis chumras on Pesach have to do with the dinim of neder. So it's
It-
something
it's
you
very
don't eat
applicable.
mitzad neder.
It's very applicable at a Seder when you have other food for other people and you have your own food.
Yeah. Ein noch ein Name. Yeah, so very good application. Pashas Nira Hecker. If the food is also, if it's muchzik b'teilayim, so then it's like nevela. More isurim than nevela. Okay, so let us proceed. So share. Oops. Oh, we had this already. Let's go further. So this was the case that was asked over here when we spoke about not drinking from the same cup. So if, as long as you clean it beforehand, then it's okay. You see over here that you shouldn't use it because the Michael Nidba Bakli, but it's clear that if you wash it, there's no Isser on it. Now today the minig is, and the post can bring down, you have even Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, that we have separate kalim for everything. Even for drinking, have separate kalim for milchus and fleishiks. But al pi din, if you're drinking some water, you can drink it with a fleishik asuda, drink it with a milchik asuda. You can't use the same bread in a milchik asuda and a fleishik asuda. So if you need to, before you start using it, separating it. You have a tshuva for a meisha, nigras meisha, there's a tshuva where he differentiates between pieces of bread that were mamish on the table, like small pieces, slices, so to speak. Well, let's say you used half a challah. So you started cutting and the challah was on the challah board, or the bread is on the cutting board, and you start cutting pieces. So the large piece, which is left, so it was not traveling around the table that people were handling it. So he has a kula there. He speaks about but in any case, we do have such a heter, and the thing to do, if you realize that that's going to happen, then you take it and you leave it in the bag. So let's say a person has a loaf of bread, and the bread is in slices, and they want to have some by a milchika lunch, and they want to have some for a fleishika supper. So what do? So when you take the pieces out you want for the milchik, and you make the milchik, and the rest of the bag remains parv. That's the simplest practical way to do it. And the separation between, we mentioned this before, ish machmirim, that those that are machmir, even the closed ones, because eda machal means the steam that's coming out of the different foods that could go inside and make it fleshik. As I mentioned, we'll speak about that more in the end of Simon Sadik base. And now we go on to Sim Peites Sif Dalit. So we have, I guess, really 4 different dinim over here. The last 2 are about sakinim, about milchik and fleshik knives. Let's go in order here. So Machaber says, you can see on the top over here, I guess everybody probably figured out over here. On the left-hand side, you have where it is in Shulchan Aruch.
Why did we skip the Dalet?
We skipped the Dalet because Aleph through Gimel is a separate subject about waiting, and that's going to be the next shiur. And over here, we're still speaking about things getting mixed up, not in your digestive system, like waiting from meat to milk or something like that. We're talking about actual mamoshes, things getting mixed up. So that was really the subject that we've been speaking about in Peches, eating at the same table, and especially the bread on the table and so on that the Ramah was speaking about, eating from it, and the salt shakers and these things. So now we're talking about other things which relate to the table. So thematically, although it's a different seder than Shulchan Aruch, nevertheless, the one that structured the shiur and put it together, I think it's a good idea because it's the theme is the same theme. And the makkah for this din, the Beis Yosef brings down, it's a Talmud Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says this first din. Misha achol gvina, v'reitz alechol basar. So it's a hemshech to coming earlier that you have to wait between milchiks and fleishiks. But that we'll learn in Mitzvah Shem next time. But is there anything else you have to do? So let's say it's not hard cheese. Say a person had gvina, they had cottage cheese. So, not giving away any secrets, that minhag Chabad is to wait an hour, but al pidin, you don't need to do that. You just have to make the physical separation that you don't have mamashas mixed up in your mouth and in your hands and so on. And then you don't need a waiting period from milchiks to fleishiks. Hard cheese, 6 hours. Definition of hard cheese, we'll speak about that in the next Shiur mitzvah. But let's say you took care of all that, and now you want to eat meat, and it's on the same table. The bread, the pieces of bread you ate with the cheese, you have to take off the table. Why? Because since it was a milchik meal, and we assumed that when you were touching the pieces of bread, there was some mamashas on it. So we're worried that there's mamashas of milchiks on the bread, so that bread has to go off the table. So obviously, you're not allowed to eat it with the fleishiks. That's a kolshkin, but it's not even allowed to be on the table. You have to clear the table of all the leftover bread. And so to the tablecloth. So the first din is talking about the bread. The bread has to go off the tablecloth. The second din is you can't use the same tablecloth either, because you're going to eat gvina on the same tablecloth that somebody ate bosor on. So there's going to be remnants of bosor, but derech hateva, the tablecloth gets dirty. And what is it dirty from? So it's dirty from bosor. So there's leftover bosor over there, and you're going to eat cheese. You're going to put the cheese on the table. So then you have a problem. So too, the opposite, if it's we're not only worried about meat being on the table, we're worried about the gevina from milchiks also being on the table. So if there was a tablecloth that somebody ate milchiks on, so you can't eat fleishiks on that table either. So that's the second din. The first din is about taking the leftover pieces of bread off the table, and the second din is taking the tablecloth off the table. Fine. And the primary chashash over here, I want to mention again, is that of mamashas. The whole discussion, are we worried about blias? Are we worried about the taste that's absorbed inside? So there's a whole discussion in the poskim about it. The Rashba says you can turn the tablecloth upside down. And whether that helps, it doesn't help, is a whole discussion in the Nesa Kalim. Are we worried about blias? Are we not worried about blias? But over here, the primary consideration we're talking about, at least in these first two dinim, is mamashas. We're worried that the pieces of bread might have some remnant of milchiks of fleishing on them. So too, remaining on the tablecloth, there could be some remnant of basar achov. Now, what about the knives? The history of cutlery, people always needed knives. Can't eat without a knife. You have big pieces, you have to make small pieces to get into your mouth. Not that a cheretz, so you're going to take a whole up to a leg of a behemoth and bite into it. You have to cut it. You need a knife. You need a fork? Lav dafke. So you cut it into pieces and you can eat it with your hands. Maybe eat it with a spoon. It seems that forks developed later, because whatever you could do with a fork, you could sort of do with a knife and a spoon also. Whatever the case is, the knives have a special status in halacha. Before we read these two dinim, let me just explain something about knives. Knives have a number of special halachic issues associated with them. One thing which is mentioned is the possibility, or to what extent, do they actually absorb tam. So we know that normally, how does taste go into a keli? We'll be discussing kelim as we put in the outline later on, later simonim. Start the gimel and after that. But in general, we know the idea of tam ke'ikir, that the taste of the food gets absorbed into a keli. But when does that happen? When there's heat, when it was cooked in the keli, so then you have absorption. And a whole discussion, Klidishin, Iri Klidishin, and so on. How much of it gets absorbed in the Keli. And we also have Kavish and Maluach. We learned a few times, we'll have more in Siman Tzadik Aleph, that we have as a result of something being pickled sitting for 24 hours. If you have cold milk sitting in a Keli for 24 hours, so the taste of the milk gets absorbed into the Keli. It's midrabanan, it's not derech bishul, but nevertheless, midiraisa, the time gets absorbed. So you can have absorption when it's hot, and then we say kavish kemavushal. It's also like it's been cooked, so you also have a bli. A knife, in some contexts, and according to some Rishonim, it all depends on the circumstances. The fact that there's heat to a certain extent, when you cut with a knife, there's a certain amount of pressure. The duchka, the sakina, according to some, they explain that it creates a certain amount of heat, and there's a little bit of absorption too. Bikaradin, we're not concerned about that, unless it's a davar charif. And now we have a whole very important siman tzadik vav, which is going to talk about what's the din of a knife which is used to cut a davar charif. So if you use a knife to cut an onion or something like that, you use a fleshka knife to cut an onion. And so basically, halacha lamaisa, we look at that onion, at least part of that onion, as being fleshik. We'll discuss. We have all Simon speaking about this inyan. But that's if it's a davar chad. If it's not a davar chad, if you use the fleshka knife to cut a potato, so we say normally if the knife is clean, so then rinse it off and you can go weiter. We're not really concerned about this issue that there should be an absorption of belia, although in some contexts we are. But be'ikar adin, we're not really concerned about that. But there was a big if. I said if the knife was clean. And that's where the second concern about knives comes in. And that's the concern that it's difficult to clean knives. The way I understand this myself, even today, is that if you're washing dishes and you have to wash a spoon and you have to wash a knife that was used for fleshik, which would you rather wash? So it's easier to clean a spoon. Spoon, you take a sponge, time, and it gets clean. When you have a knife, it's going to get so clean with the sponge right away. You're going to have to maybe use some more soap. You're going to have to use the abrasive side, the steel wool or whatever it is you're using to rub it, because the fats and it's nidbak. You end up with some shamnunis, some sort of, whether it's the oil, the fat, whatever it is, and whether it's because of what it's cutting or the method of cutting the duchta sakina, it seems to be more stuck onto the surface, and therefore it's harder to clean. So you can see the way they used to eat and the way they used to live. You see in dinim of erev tafshilin. So it says when you make a erev tafshilin, you need a kzayis. You have to take a cooked food of a kzayis to put it away. So it says it doesn't have to be such a chashuv of food. So it says that even you take the sakin, it says that you take the fleshik knife and you just wipe off the leftover fat on the knife. That's also good enough as long as there's a kzayis. A kzayis. I mean, that's a lot. Either that's a really, really big knife, or there's a lot of left pretty dirty knife. And I think you need both to get a kazayas from the leftover shamnunis. Okay, today there's a sink right around the corner. Washing dishes was a much bigger deal for most of world history, and it was not done as much as a matter of course. Today, people don't leave dishes dirty for so long, because what's a big deal? Go to the sink, put in the dishwasher, without a dishwasher, but there's running water at least. But to wash the dishes constantly, what for? You're going to be using it again soon anyway. So there was a lot of built up food deposits on it, and that creates another issue. So therefore, we're going to use this knife to cut something. So we use the knife, let's say, to cut meat. So now we have a problem. We need to cut some cheese. It's a fleshika knife. Okay, but the knife is cold and the cheese is cold. If it was hot, we'd have another problem of the blia. Because if you use the fleshika knife to cut hot meat, so then there was a blia. There was an absorption of fleshika. It's mamish a fleshika knife. The tam Bosor went into the knife. Okay, now you're going to cut some cheese. So if you cut hot cheese, everybody understands that's a problem. But if you're going to cut cold cheese, if it's cold, no, bos kenshin zay. So the din is kol shekain, if you're not even allowed to use the same tablecloth. Kol shekain she'aser lachtech gvina. Afilu tzenenes b'sakin shergil lachtech basar. Even if the cheese is cold, you still can't use it with a knife, which is normally used to cut meat. Then a second chumrah we have about the sakin. El afilu hapas she'eichlem imagvina also lachtech b'sakin shechetem basar. The knife that you use to cut meat, you can't use to cut bread and eat the bread with gvina. Eat the bread with cheese. And it goes the other way. It's not a special din that you use it for basar, and therefore we're just worried about the fat. The same thing if you cut the cheese. It's a milchik knife. You can't use that to cut basar. And even furthermore, another harchaka here, that you're not allowed to cut bread to eat that bread together with the other min, with the opposite min. So it ends up that aside from the din I mentioned you before, leftover challah. So we say that the bread that which is left over, you shouldn't eat with the other min. And you have over here, right over here in Sifdal, you have to take away those pieces, and obviously you're not allowed to eat. You can't take the meat that was on the fleishik table from Shabbos. You can't use that challah that was, since it was sitting, any bread that was on a fleishik table. It's the weekday too. I'm using Shabbos as an example. And you want to make a Sunday grilled cheese sandwich, you can't because it was on a fleishik table. Furthermore, even if it was covered with a fleishik knife, you have a problem. Now you might ask, how fleishik is the fleishik knife? Maybe it was just washed with fleishik, but then you still have the inyan of still a fleishik knife. So the prichodesh. The Pri-Chodesh, Alter Rebbe frequently quotes the Pri-Chodesh. Pri-Chodesh was way back, it was before the Pri Megadim too. He also quotes the Pri-Chodesh. Gedele poskim from Sfard. So the Pri-Chodesh says it was a minig. The people had a separate knife just for bread to avoid this problem. They didn't use it for anything else. They just used it to cut bread. So we have 4 dinim over here. The first din is that you have to take the leftover bread off the table in order to eat with the other min. Secondly, you have to take off the tablecloth, change the tablecloth. And then the last 2 dinim regarding a knife, that you can't cut the milchiks with a fleishka knife and vice versa. And the 4th thing, you can't even cut the bread with the fleishka knife to eat the bread with gevina. So these are other chumras over here, the befedish dinim in Mechaber. The Ramah brings an eitzah. Miu al yedin eitzah bakarka kosha shari. But if you stick it in the hard ground, then it's okay. And this comes from the Meissen Gemara you have at the end of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Famous siyum from the Rebbe on this whole. Nigla Sicha over there that Rebbe learns that it's what did it help? What was the problem with the knife? How did it have to kasher the knife and so on? In any case, what's Neitza Bakarka Kosha? It's a very interesting thing. You know, you speak with the Yidden, that they don't know anything about kosher. They know zero about kosher. The only thing they know something about burying knives in the backyard, or burying spoons in the backyard, burying plates in the backyard. I've heard it from many, many people. Everybody knows something about putting kalim in the ground. So it sounds bizarre. I mean, why would somebody bury a spoon? I mean, what's pshat? So the pshat is Mastama, they got mixed up with this din. It's Mastama where it came from, because there is such a din of neitza bakarka. Neitza bakarka is halacha, it's a beferish Ramah, and it's something which is takadon on occasion. What does it help for? Neitza bakarka kosher. So it's not burying it. You have to stick it into the ground. It has to be karka kosher. So when can you do that? I'm sure the ground's frozen a good part of the year, so you can't stick it in the ground. It depends where you live and which season it is. But the idea is that we're worried about the buildup of shemnunis, whatever it is, on the surface of the knife. And just washing it alone is not really good enough. So you stick it into the hard ground, so it's sort of reenacting the act of cutting something where you need to do with pressure. So you put it in the karka kosher and you do it 10 times, each place in a different place. So it's like you're cutting 10 times that knife, and the karka kosher is rubbing off whatever remnant might be on the surface of the side of the knife, and that's sufficient. Does it take care of the blee inside? No. If it's a knife that was used for something hot and it absorbed the taste of it, so then there's not going to help this. Then you still have to kasher it. You have to do a gula, whatever the case is, to get it out. A whole discussion, Kuf Chaf Aleph in Yeridei about Hechsher Kalim, about whether knives we have to do. It's not enough to do a gula, whether you have to do liban on it because maybe you cut something that was sitting on the fire by a barbecue. You cut it, so then it's hishtamish al yedei ha'esh, and just hagola with boiling water is not enough. Anyway, a whole discussion over there, different size knives, whole discussion Shulchan Aruch over there. It's a very short simon of Chafal, Kash and Kalim, B'Shari Surim, says Shulchan Aruch over there. Go take a look at Hilchos Pesach. That's why I explained how to Kash and Kalim. The only case he's going to differentiate that he has to explain is the cases where it's different for Shari Surim as it's from Pesach. And the main discussion over there, one of the main discussions over there is knives. In any case, if you're only worried about the buildup on the surface of the knife, and you're not worried about the absorption of the knife, so the eitzah is nitza b'karka kosher. So if you do nitza, then it's shari. But you have to pay attention over here. Which din is the Ramah talking about? Okay, so there's 4 cases over here. So it's clear he's talking about a knife. We're not talking about putting the tablecloth in the karka kosher. Yeah, nitza b'karka kosher, talking about the knife. So there are 2 cases that the Mechaber spoke about. He spoke, so out of the 4 cases, we had number 3 and number 4. Number 3 was using, let's say it's a fleishik knife. Case number 3 is using a fleishik knife to cut cheese. Not allowed to do it. Case number 4 is using a fleishik knife to cut bread to eat with cheese. Now the Ramah says, "Mi al yedei neitza b'karka kosher shari." What? Which case? Both? One? Which one is he talking about? So that is a machlekes shachatas. The Taz is more mekel, and he wants to say this eitzah of neitza b'karka is even good for case number 3. That after you do neitza b'karka, this fleishik knife you can even cut cheese with it. The Shach says no, that we don't have a heter for. What's going to be the heter? What is the Ramah talking about? He's talking about nitza b'karka. You should be able to cut the bread and then be able to eat it with cheese. Okay, but this is all somewhat academic, except for Shas Adchak, as we're soon going to see, because the Ramah says, "Avakvar nogu kol Yisrael liyas lehem shnei sakin," because the universal minig is people have 2 knives. And you should make a mark on one of them that it should be a heker. So he says, the minig then they would make the reshem. So the achreinim say they used to make a chritz. So they didn't have plastic handles like you do today. So you get a red knife and you get a blue handled knife or whatever the case is, or you take some face nail polish and you paint on it, or you find some other way to make a distinction. But then a knife was a knife and finished. So how are you going to distinguish between the 2 of them? So you took one of them and you would put a chritz, you would cut into it, and you could see one of them had a smooth handle and the other one had a handle, only be a wooden handle. So you cut into the wooden handle and you see there's a chritz. So how are you supposed to know from the chritz? You're going to go and make over there, what are you going to write over there? A fei. I mean, it's not so easy to make a fei for fleishik or a base for Bosor, and it's very difficult to see. They would just make a mark. Again, some of them, Charein bring it down, used to be the minig, then they would make 3 marks, because maybe one of the marks it would be hard to see. They make 3 marks. So then, okay, so it's marks, so the 2 of them are different. But which one's fleishik, which one's milchik? So to keep people from being mixed up, so the minig was that you made the reshem on a milchik knife. So if it's a milchik, if you see a chritz, it's a milchik knife, and then you don't get mixed up. Today we use other simonim for this, use different colors. Red is usually fleishik, although I was once in the kitchen, for some reason they decided they wanted to make the milchik red and they want to make the fleishik blue. Okay, does that come to a violation of minig Yisrael? It's a little common sense, but I guess if must be written somewhere. In any case, so that's the minig. I bring the kids to Shulchan Aruch that the minig is already by Yidden, but different sets of dishes. They have everything separate from milchiks and fleishiks. But as I mentioned, there are some keilas where they're still doing it like the old ways, and for drinking glasses that are used for cold, they won't keep them separate. There are hechsherim that will rent out kosher kalim, and the drinking glasses that are used for cold, they won't be makbid, not milchik fleishik, not even kosher treif. Which the emphasis is if you're renting it out for a ches, a chasna, bar mitzvah. So we imagine people are not going to be leaving it there for 24 hours. I mean, it's an Italian wedding, they go on for a few days, I think, but they're not usually kosher. If it's a dover charif, then it could be an issue. But anyway, if you plan on doing it, ask whatever company you're renting from what their policy is. Okay. So this is case number one. So take the leftover bread off the table before, if it was, that was the first case, before the yellow. You have to take off the shulchan. That's from the Talmud Yerushalmi. Second case is you can't use the same tablecloth. These pictures are coming up in the wrong order. It's okay. You cannot cut my cholav with a sakin shel Bosor, even if it's cold. Then we have the din of the same, using the same tablecloth for both. That was the second case of Mechaber. And then we have the fourth case of the Mechaber. Not only you can't use the fleishik knife to cut cheese, you can't use the fleishik knife to cut bread in order to eat that bread with the cheese. So those are the four dinim that we have in this Mechaber. So let's go through them one at a time. It says the leftover pieces you can't eat with the mina havchi. We have the lashon Yerushalmi over here. Moment. Lashon Yerushalmi. Yeah. The achel chuvitz a boil a mechel kupar mavayr psisin. It doesn't sound like any language you recognize, but anyway, the achel chuvitz, mechabetz is to make cheese. So a person ate cheese, boil a mechel kupar, and he wants to eat meat. Mavayr psisin. Psisin is pieces. So he has to take the pieces off the table. Okay. So what's called pieces? So this is the Igros Meisha. So he brings down. You have little pieces, the pieces that are eaten together, like let's say it's put on this thing over here. So these are already pieces. But the prusa so the parts that you're actually eating together with the meal, you have to take off. But alechem ashalim, achelka agadol shalei nachtach yesh machmir lasirim, avim alechem hoy betech sakit v'kedei mein tzarich lasirim. So the Ramesha said, if you left it inside the bag, so then you don't have to take it off. So yesh machmir lasirim. Again, the Ramesha wants to say that if it wasn't really cut. Yeah, I'm saying now this din from Rav Meisha. He has different stodim. The Rav Meisha. There's what's tzarikra din. Certainly, if it was left inside the bag, the fact that you cut it and used it at a milcha kasuda or fleisha kasuda, I had was once danced by one of the or Neil Ma'emes, one of the Kanim here, and he was living by himself. He was an alman. And he has a lot of leftover chal, and he wants to eat it during the week for milchik. And he knows that once you cut it, and he ate it for a Shabbos meal, and he wanted to have it for milchik the rest of the week. That's what I told him to do. I said, take him. I said, leave it on the cutting board, and after you cut it, and you make your matzi, and you take some, so take the rest of it and put it in a plastic bag. Finished. That's the easiest way to preserve it. But once it's on the table, and especially if there are kids around, but once people are mamashmish, but yodayim, after they started eating with the min, so then it's a problem. The Ramesh's heter using the big piece, that psisin is, the mashmois is that it's being eaten together with the food. So then we're concerned that there's mamashas of, let's say it's being used this looks like milchiks, yeah. So then there's some milchiks that got onto the bread. But if it's I don't know the idea of putting this big bread that looks like there's a big one that wasn't cut there. So as long as you take it off the table or out of the reach of the people that would be mamashmish with the food, that you don't have to worry there was mamashas on it, so he would allow it. Okay, so that was case number one, Mavayir Psisim from Yerushalmi. Now, what about the tablecloth? Yeah, so Ma'adin kasher eichlim is macholim betech kelim v'leil mapa atzma. So this is brought down Piskei Tshuva on the page over here, brings down the Radbaz. The Radbaz says, what does it mean you're eating on the tablecloth? You're literally eating on the tablecloth. You take the cheese and you put it on the tablecloth. Who says you have to have a plate? You're eating on the table. It says you're eating on the tablecloth, yeah? So you're eating on the tablecloth. But what if you're eating not on tablecloth? You're eating in a plate, you're eating in a bowl. So Radbaz says, the Shulchan Aruch is not talking about that. Then you don't need to change tablecloths. Mikaradin ain't seirich lachlif mappa ben suda besoris or suda chalavis. Mikaradin, you don't even have to have a separate tablecloth. The food's not touching the tablecloth. The food is in a keli. The bottom of the plate is touching the tablecloth. What does that bother you? That's what Radbaz says. The Bach says sorach lachlif is a mappa. Ki yesh lach rishayori amina avchi yivlu bekli amina shenik ashura seich. He's worried about blias. He's worried if there's a hot keli. So maybe you had a hot keli on the tablecloth before. So you had a hot milcha keli. Or some hot cheese fell on the table, a hot piece of pizza, something like this came onto the table. And then later on, you had a hot piece of meat fell on the table. He's worried about blias. The achreinim that bring down the worry that also because of mamashas. You're worried about mamashas. Who says the bottom of the keli, everything's so clean. And if the mappa itself was dirty, there's food on the mappa. Everybody knows when you have to eat, even though we all eat with plates and bowls. And it doesn't mean after the Shabbos meal, the food is being eaten in plates and bowls, all the fleishiks, and you still have to clean the table afterwards. So there is mamashas over there as well. Some achrin bring up that case over there, but Vekaradin, sometimes it's very important to learn these dinim. On the one hand, you have to be machmar on everything, and especially people get confused once you mekel with one thing that they assume. Like if you're going to take, we learned the first din we learned today about you can't put on the same table. You can't put them on the place from Masadir and Bayaichel on the counter. You're allowed to do. Take something in your average Jewish home, and you're going to take milchik coffee and you put on the fleishik counter. So you're not going to go by without. Quote unquote, a comment. What are you doing? You're trafing on my kitchen over here. So other things, which are more of a halachic problem, people are less careful about. But the maisa is you can be makel in these things. So the people say the whole thing is not so important anyway. It's all chumras upon chumras upon chumras. And once you break, especially after it became the minig to keep things separate, so definitely nobody would be makel like the Radbaz today. Minig Yisrael lachlip mipmapa ben suda besoris l'chalovim minitin lachlip ben amapas lachar shover el kibus. Also a frequent question, if you have a tablecloth, and it's fleishik, do you have to keep it fleishik forever? Can you put it in the washing machine? Does that matter it to be used? And the Matzadikra Dinya, we're soon going to talk about changing kalim from milchik to fleishiks and back. But this is doesn't have the same status of a keli. Yeah,
is it a problem to if milk spilled onto where you had sauce from the meatballs on the tablecloth and then some milk spilled on it and you put it in a hot washing machine? Is that a problem of visual?
There are those that there are actually achreinim that speak about this, but in general they say, listen, by the time you put it in over there, you're going to have bittul b'shishim, and how many people are putting over there, like you can have mamish meatballs hanging over there on the all different types of tablecloths, I guess. But in general, it's not a matter of concern. You should clean it off if it's mamish bosor b'cholav. The whole din of a dishwasher is probably more complicated than a clothing. Something for washing tablecloths and clothing, because then you put the soap normally. I mean, I suppose there are all different types of washing machines. Maybe I'm not familiar with the modern day washing machines, but normally the soap goes straight in the water. So we have the din of pegima, which we're going to be learning later on, like I'll be washing dishes. So that makes it easier. And the dishwasher not always does the soap make the water pogum. Depends where in the cycle the soap is coming in time-wise and also physically. It's filling up with water first, and then the soap's coming in later. Different types of dishwashers. But the place you're going to wash a tablecloth, normally the water already has soap in it, so they're not really worried about it. But it's obviously better if you have a large amount of meatballs.
I think the modern washing machines are better because the water goes through the soap thing, and the older ones, it would fill in, and you put the soap in separately.
Okay. Yeah, so the poskim right there. Those are right about it. They're not really worried. Okay, so here's sort of a summary of the dinim of the knife. We're worried, first of all, the shamnun shalasaki, the grease or whatever which is on the surface of the blade. So therefore, just like it got on as a result of the duchka, the sakina, the lashon, the deichik, the pressure of the knife, so too, when you're going to use that pressure to cut something else, it's likely to come off. Then we have a second problem. So that's in our din over here, some petesef dal that we just learned. So that's the concern, the shemnune shalasaki. The absorption which was inside, since this is all cold, we're not really worried about that, la halacha. But in Simon Tzadik Vav, we say duch hasach b'dar charif is problems. Here you're cutting up onions with radishes. Hasakin ever davar acharif. So the absorption which is inside the knife will also go out if it's cutting something sharp. And so too we'll have in Simon Tzadik Dalit and Siv Zayin that if you're cutting a davar reisayach, okay, then hablish b'zeh hasachin ever davar reisayach kulei. That'll go also through the whole thing. So if you would have, for example, a hot piece of cheese touches a hot piece of meat. So assuming it's not a davar shamin, okay, we'll have a whole discussion about that. It doesn't go through the entire piece of meat. It's only going to go in a little bit, kadei netila, whatever the case is. We'll be learning later in Simon Tzadik and later, okay? But if you have together with the heat, you have also the skina, so then that has the power that the blia, the absorption, which is in that knife, if this was a milchik knife, it's going to go through the entire piece of meat. So it'll answer the whole thing instead of just answering the surface. Is the issue with deichik the friction or the pressure or both? That's itself the machlekes rishonim. Whether the main thing is the pressure or it's for sure the pressure. That's deichik. Question is, does that involve heat, and as a result of that, a blia also? So that's a whole discussion. Okay, so here's the inyan of nitza bakarka. So the last two cases we had in the machaber about using the fleishik knife, for example, to cut cheese, or using the fleishik knife to cut the bread to eat with the cheese. So it says that the 10 times you do nitza bakarka. So you have a picture of karka. Oh, nitza bakarka machay. So so that Yeredus of Shemnune Shala Sakin. So putting it in 10 different places is going to rub off that Shamnunes from the surface. So what is the din today? Can you use steel wool or something like that, or use one of these sponges that has some abrasive material on it? So that is be'emes. The end of Aveda Zorah, there's the taste. It speaks about using wool. Not talking about steel wool, it's talking about wool from a sheep. And brings down an opinion that says that if you use the wool from a sheep, it is also just as good. But la halacha, so shaila whether the wool of the sheep is good is nitza bakarka itself machlekes, and then whether our sponges are as good, scotch they call it, I think in the modern Hebrew. Yeah, what I say over nachloga achreim shivshuf yisedim karit kirtzuf, so kratzen. Yeah, v'chemer nikwe, and also you're using soap and things like this. Nechshav kanitza bakarka. Maybe that's enough. So I have machlekes achreinim whether that's good enough, but there are those that say it's not, and you need mamash kanitza bakarka.
Why is it a machlekes? These, like a sponge is made for this kind of thing. A wool from a sheep is not even made to clean dishes.
The wool from the sheep is also machlekes. And this, that it's made to clean the dishes, the shaila is whether you need the duchka. So you're never going to, I don't know if you ever did nitza bakarka, but I've done nitza bakarka. If it's karka kosher, okay, you don't wash dishes like that. Now I mentioned before, okay, we have a lot of, just want to make sure we finish the material for today. So I think we're still okay, but let's go through it just a little bit quicker. So I mentioned before that this statement that Ramah, remember, din number 3 was using we have a fleshka knife. So din number 3 can use a fleshka knife to cut cheese. Mechaber says no. Din number 4 can use the fleshka knife to cut bread to eat with cheese. Mechaber says no. Then the Ramah said, Miyu nitza bakarka, it's okay. Now, which case is that talking about? The case of cutting the cheese or the case of cutting the bread to eat with the cheese? So the Taz I mentioned before is Mekel, and he says it's talking about case number 3, the case of cutting the cheese. And therefore he says Neitza Bakarka helps that if you took the fleshka knife and you stuck it 10 times into hard ground in different places, so then you can use that knife to cut cheese. So Mikra Din says the Taz, Sakin Bosor Shover Neitza Bakarka Mutter Lachtach Imei Gvina. Even the Gvina itself. Case number 3, it helps for case number 3. The Nitza Bakarka helps for case number 3. Let's say you want to cut the bread. So then he says, good enough quinoa. Just clean it off. You don't need to do a Nitza Bakarka. Just make sure it's clean as best you can. So we're not worried that there might be a tiny bit left. It's going to go to the bread and it's going to go to the cheese. We're not worried. So the Taz says Nitza Bakarka helps even for the Gvina. The minig is not to do it. But we're not so machmer. The case number 4, we ask her also. And then you don't even need to do nitza bakarka. It's good enough kinuach. Dai bekinuach hasaki. That's what the Taz said. So taka case number 3, the minig is not to do it, but bikar adin it's okay. Which would mean once something is bikar adin okay and the minig is not to do it, so then it comes shasad chak. You can be mekel, all different sorts of cases that there's quote unquote wiggle room because Mikradin, because the Taz hold it's okay. And
so
then
minig Yisrael is not
one second. And then when it comes to cutting the bread, so then you don't even need it's bakarka. And you can just do kinuach and use a lachatchil. When we get to the minig, let's do first the shach and we'll come back to it. But the shach says no. He says the cutting gvina with a fleshka knife, man the charshmei, who allows such a thing? That's for sure, Asa. The Ramah said Nitza Bakarka helps. He's talking about Nitza Bakarka helps in order to cut the bread to eat with cheese, not to cut the cheese. So Bikar Adin Sakim Bosor Shover Nitza Bakarka Mutalach Lechim Lechem Sheyechel Megvin. And what's the minig is not to do that either. Shalelach Lechim Lechem Sheyechel Megvin. Everything becomes one step more machmer. Well, B'chol Eifon also Lach Gvina Mamish and Sakim Bosor. There's no heter for that. So not even the Shasat Chak would be a problem. So the minig is not to cut the lechem, to eat with the gvina. So then when you're talking about the challah that you're cutting with the fleshka knife, the place where it's actually cut, even if you cut it, if it's a fleshka knife. So again, there's another, I don't know whether wiggle room is the right word over there, but there's another diuk, some of the Mefarshim bring down, the mechaber, you look on the end of the 3rd line of mechaber, b'sagan sheragilin lachtech basar. Okay, so if you only use your challah knife, lamashal, on Friday night just to cut the challah, okay, it's washed together with the fleshiks, but you don't use it to cut. The person doesn't say they don't have a knife to cut the chicken, so they take the challah knife and they cut up the chicken. I haven't seen that. Don't recall ever seeing that. And so something that you use to cut mamish basar is one thing. Now, in case number 3, ragilin lachtach basar. Case number 4 is shachetchem basar. So it's a shayla whether that's really a diuk or not a diuk, but according to the Shachus Machmer, that the place, that surface, there's room to be Machmer, that even if you put that piece in the bag, the actual surface they use to cut with the fleshka knife, not to use that with milchik, and you cut another slice with a parva knife, and then use that for the milchik. So therefore, when it comes down to halach l'maisa, most of the poskim are Machmer like the Shach. So therefore, the minig is not to cut cheese with a fleshka knife and vice versa under any conditions, even after nitza bakarka. But to cut the pas is a different story. Question.
Why is there no chash of cutting hot?
What do you mean? You're not allowed to cut. cut out.
No, well, I mean, to use like after saying how does nitza b'karka help if what if cutting for like cutting bread, for example? Yeah, right, for cutting bread. So what if the bread is hot? Then there's an issue of
Then it would be also we see from the Gemara it was a Parshas was a treifa knife in the Gemara. It was a treifa knife that was that they were kashing with nitza b'karka. It was only good for cold.
so they're not the Chum weren't worried about in case like being matzir nitza b'karka, and because someone might go to cut hot after.
Poshta pshat is that this knife was not used with hot. It's only used for cut cold. Yeah, as far as whether the knife is a banyem or not, so again, that's similar to the previous question, because that's only going to be negaya really if it's using it for hot. If you're using it for cold, we're just concerned about the nitza b'karka. We don't hold really does anything to the bliya. So
Right.
as far as banyem and not banyem is, whether it's nice and tam levgam or not, that's talking about the absorption of the taste inside the knife. Here we're talking about whatever shamnunis, whatever is stuck on the surface of the knife.
Right.
No,
No, it's just surprising.
Taka, there's no heta for that. That's for sure. There's no heta.
So does the nitza b'karka take off the shamnunis or not?
The nitza b'karka takes off enough of the shemnunis that takes off. Yes, it takes off
Yes.
the shemnunis enough to cut past, but not enough to cut gvina.
But we're worried about the same thing. At the end of the day, there's still the same amount of shamnunis that's going to be on your pasor, it's going to be on your gvina or your basar.
Okay. The shaila is that we have a clear din that it's us. So the shaila is how far were they matter? Lamaisa, the minig Yisrael is not to do either. I understand what you're asking. L'chura, it's manavshach. If it takes it off, it takes it off. If it doesn't take it off, it doesn't take it off. But there is a difference, you see, between putting something in your mouth and putting something on the table to put in your mouth and putting something on a knife to put on the table to put in your mouth. Everything we're making our chaka. So we say taka, we started off with the tazba, then the taisvas, engaging gezeda le gezeda, but like, how far are you going to go?
Is the question how much are we matir with nitza b'karka or how much are we machmir with pasha and magvina?
It's a good question. Let me leave it for the end because I want to get to the last piece over there. But in any case where you're dealing, you're asking a very good question, but it's a shaila klolis. Every time we say, the glass, the Sardim say that the glass doesn't absorb tam. The Ashkenazim say for Pesach it absorbs tam. Okay, but for the rest of the year, it doesn't absorb tam, or we'll say that the tam goes in, but you can cash and get it out. When it comes Pesach, it's how much you can't get it out. So it's a manavshach. I mean, does it absorb? Does it not absorb? So in most of these cases, the simplest way to answer it is that it absorbs a tiny bit, and the shaila is, are we concerned about that tiny bit? So the Sfardim will say that it absorbs a tiny bit, and we're not worried about it. And the Ashkenazim will say for Pesach, we're worried about it. The rest of the year, we're worried, but we can say we can get it out. And al derech zeh, there's a little tiny bit. It doesn't get everything off the nitza b'karka. It gets kamat everything off. So we're still worried about it. So namish to use it to cut kavina, that we're not going to let. Because if there's a little nakuda that it didn't come off of, you're cutting the whole gavina. So we're worried that the bus is going to go straight on the gavina. But you have to worry so far that little nakuda that you missed in the karka 10 times. Why 10 times? And if you did it 9 times, maybe you should do it 100 times. They're going to be a little nakuda this. And you have to worry that the little piece over there got onto the pass. And then that pass got onto the gavina. So very so far, I mean, that's the pash. Let's just have a few minutes left. So this is shimush tamid lebasol lecholav b'machshora b'intayim asaminadin. So this is another din. It says over here 7 peites, but actually this is the din of Hilchas Yom Tov. I believe it's some kuf tes, if I'm not mistaken. There's a Magen Avram that says neigim shafilu b'eifin chad pomeh ein meshanim kli b'sari lecholavi lehepach. To change a keli that's a fleishik keli, to change it from fleishik to milchik, says the Magen Avram, you're not allowed to do. It's awesome. The same thing vice versa, because people are going to get mixed up. People get mixed up anyway. So kol shkein, if you can have something that previously was fleishik and now you make it milchik, so then you're not allowed to do that. Now, this is especially in Nageya, coming up to Shavuos. So this, the Alter Rebbe Taka brings an Ilcha Shavuos. So it's nice to say that you can't use one for the other. But let's say you have a fleischkov and you want to bake a cheesecake. To say that you can't bake a cheesecake, and people didn't have 2 ovens, especially in the old days. It's a gzeira shein reva tzibur yochel lamed be. You know, cheesecake, it's a revolution. So it's bad news for the Jews. So what's the din? So the din is you don't have to buy a new oven. Up din, you don't have to buy a new oven. You can kasher it. It's a shas adchak that you don't have another oven and you want to bake milchiks. So then, when it's a shas hadchak, then it's mutar. So something like this, which is a large keli, and it's also you're not doing it back and forth. You're doing it, for a specific reason that everybody knows about it, and you don't have another oven to do it. So that's why the Alter Rebbe speaks about the kashering a fleishka oven using milchik. All discussion there about how to do it in Hilchos Shavuos. Now there's another din. Imachshas a keli lePesach or biglal shenitraf. You're not allowed to kasher it from fleishik in order to make it milchik. But once you kasher it, then it becomes parv. You kasher it for Pesach. So now it's a brand new keli. Or let's say it became treif, and now you have to kasher it. There's a prima godim that says it used to be a minig, that if somebody wanted to change the keli, they'd be matrif it on purpose. So it's a shvere inyan. And they make it treif, so then they have to kasher it. Okay, now I can change it to the other, from fleshik to milk, or whatever the case is. So if you do it for Pesach, or you do it from you kasher it. So you're starting with a brand new keli. Brand new keli. It's not fleshik. It's not milchik. Now you're not changing it anymore. So that's another case where it's allowed. And so too, another had to this. You're not changing it to be fleshik. You're changing it to be parv. That's also there's no gzeir. And then there's another din. There's a whole ma'isa with the rishenim. The famous heter that all the poskim speak about lagab old China and places where it's a big hefsid. Yesh matirim beklish leishtamshu yibes chadoshim, something which was not used for 12 months. So there are those that are makel under such conditions, and Ramesha brings it down. Yeah, well, there are different sheinim achreim that say in such a case if it's 12 months. You can kasher it 3 times. There are some that even matter for expensive China, people that are trying to go kosher and can do everything, but to give up their China that they inherited that was treif, and you can't kasher, klicheres, you can't kasher, there are those also matter. If it's more than your beis chedesh, and you kasher it 3 times, there are those that are matter. But the Evid, the whole thing of kashering kelim, you're kashering eine ben yemei, so it's already hagolus kelim tam kikas midiraisa, but once it's over the 24 hours, it's already eine ben yemei. So then it doesn't absorb. So anyway, there's such a heter, and there are those that say the same heter applies, changing something milchik to fleshik, or vice versa. Okay, so I'll take some questions now. As a kid, we would kash with nitza bakarka knife. Yeah, sure, done it many times. Okay, questions.
There's no problem being myrim for making your own kli treif just to be able to.
Yeah, Prima Gunman speaks about being mavatal lechatchila. You're gonna make a treif in order to kasher it. I mean, the whole shaila b'chal agolos kelim. You want to see a whole discussion about it? The sefer agolos kelim. Why is it what are you doing by agolos kelim? You take a keli, it's got a treif tam, and what are you doing? You're putting in hot water, and what are you doing? You're mavatal iser. The iser is coming out into the water. Why is that not mavatal iser lechatchila? Anyway, whole other discussion. So we don't use the water. It's one of the reasons you throw out the water. You don't use the water from the agola. But anyway, it's a whole other thing. Yeah, the Prima Godim says that there was a minig. It's not clear whether he's advising that as a method to use. But yeah. Any other questions? Look at this. We finished 3 minutes early. It's mamish. Ask whatever you want. Harchav picha. If you want to hear some interesting shaylas, for those of you, some of you I know have the sefer over there, Psokim Machuvas. So there he goes through all the different kalim here. The end of some petas. All the day is about every possible thing that you have in in the kitchen, everything from the table and the tablecloths to the placemats, to the pots, to the mixers, to the peelers, to the forks, the knives, the spoons, the serving trays, everything different. All the poskim that speak about a grinder, a blender, the tray for a baby, stovetops.
Here's a question. What about why were they worried about the blias in the table in terms of putting mixed kalim on it and not for a knife?
Good question. Yeah. Yeah, good question. I guess that it's not that you're not worried, you are worried, but you can't tell people, don't eat hot food. When you can tell people you're not allowed to use this knife for something hot. That's perhaps the reason. The pashta pshat is also that the knife, they're talking about a knife that there was no blia. The shaila is in the Gemara where they're talking about that. That's part of the Rebbe Siyum in Masechta Avodah Zarah. I think it's Chelik Yitches, Kutasichus. Kashing an oven for Pesach, what temperature? Okay, that's like more or less random. And the last question about the kashing the 12-month child, you don't do that without speaking to a Rav first, because it's mamash shas adchak, such a thing. It's like sort of this is the last thing to keep the people from going kosher. Then you do it, but normally you don't rely on this heter. As far as kashering, so kashering, if it's hatera bala, then normally it's good enough liben kal. Hagala or liben kal is good enough if it's hatera bala. So when you're talking about bala v'cholav, where it's kosher meat and it's kosher milk, so then it's hatera bala. Then we're not concerned. You don't need liben gomer. It's good enough liben kal. The Alter Rebbe says that you need liben gomer because he's talking over there about klicheres. The oven was made out of cheres or something else which would need the liben gomer. You can't kasher it the regular way. When it comes to Yisura Bala, so you have an oven that absorbed Isser, so then you need liben gomer. You have to turn it red hot in terms of temperature. It's 900 degrees, 950, something like that. Self-clean oven usually reaches such a temperature. That's if it's Yisura Bala. What's with chametz for Pesach? So for kasha for Pesach, so it's a machlekes. Is that called hatera bala? Because when it absorbed chametz was mutter. Or do we call it isura bala? Because it's chametz, it absorbed chametz and it's now chametz. So it's the same thing before it was later. Bosor b'chalav, when it absorbed it was Bosor, and now it changed the name. It's Bosor b'chalav. That's that Haggah, Siman Tov Nun Aleph. I told you about in Hilchos Pesach. But the Alter Rebbe gives his revolutionary definition of Bosor b'chalav. That since it changed its name, it went from the name Bosor and the name Chalav to Bosor b'chalav is a new name. So that is something that such a chales it doesn't normally happen. But chametz doesn't need to change its name. It just sticks around until Tesvav Nisan, it becomes Isser. It's the same chametz. So therefore we call it Isura Bala because the same thing it's Isser now. It's the same thing it absorbed before. It absorbed chametz and now it's chametz. So anyway, it's a machlekes. The Alter Rebbe says that l'chatchila we're machmer to require liben gomer for an oven that absorbed the chametz. But shas adchak, let's say Shabbos, a whole bunch of conditions over there. The Alter Rebbe says you can rely on the other ones. There was taka once a public seder that this happened. Yeah, if something was supposed to be covered with foil and the foil came off, had to rely on a liben kal. Taka had all the conditions of the Alter Rebbe in that case. Yeah, Mr. Madah smiling over here. Okay, Rabbi say, so please do chazara. So this is 4 classes out of 16, Bosor b'chalav, 25% finished to keep up the chazara. And if you don't remember it easy, don't be disappointed. That's the way the memory works. You don't do chazara, use it or you lose it. To keep doing the chazara. And Freilich and Lag Baimer, and we'll be in touch about the week after. Okay. Kol Tov.
Thank you.
Sei gesund.